Sword of Coming Chapter 830. The graceful and unidentified woman, her eyes applauded, smiled and said, "Good memory. It's just that I heard a voice on the bridge back then. After many years I still only listen to her words here, and I can be sure that it is the old man of the year. So is it a teenager who is nostalgic or is it a grudge?" Qin Pingan was expressionless, and carefully looked at the woman who was previously called Auntie Feng. She is a tall woman, stepping on a pair of walking shoes, without hanging any waist badges that can indicate the official status of xianxia, round-neck brocade clothes, and clothes are actually the old-style xuanhuan's arrogant regulations. With light makeup and peachy face, his face is full of flowers after drinking wine, his lips are faint with wine. Qin Pingan was once seen in a literati's writing notes. It is an ancient palace of ancient Shu, named Yichuan face makeup. Her hands are soft, and her nails seem to be smashed and dyed with cicadas and balsams. She is extremely red and lovely. With a colorful knot tie one end of the blue silk, which hangs on the chest, like a blue waterfall cascading across the peaks. Qin Pingan took a closer look at the knot and found that the knot, which was no more than a coin, was actually made of twisted nearly 100 thin silk threads, and they were of different colors. As if the colors of the world, all in this colorful rope. The most mysterious thing is this Auntie Feng. She doesn't have any spiritual ripples on her body, and she hasn't used any immortal means, but her whole person is always immaculate. It's like she is not in the world at all, but a tourist wading in the long river of time, just deliberately letting people see her. As for the remaining young monks on the roof, Qin Pingan was of course concerned, but he was not too distracted. Anyway, he only looked at it with the corner of his eye, and he had a clear view. The 6 young people carefully cultivated by Dali are worthy of the dead men who have been fighting for a long time. At the moment Qin Pingan appeared, the 6 cultivators with their own badge codes, none of them showed the slightest loss of mind. It is enough to show the tenacity of the Taoist heart. The young woman with the word noon engraved on her waist card, without stepping and fighting, without chanting mantras, formed a small world, protecting the 7 people, and above the roof, it was like a pocket-sized mirage appeared. A fairy palace was transformed into a palace, the mountains and soil are all red, the rock is continuous like a cloud, the purple gas rises in the Lingjin cave house, the Cheongtai jade room, the Xianting Yinglang row upon row, everywhere radiant light, which resounds Lingbao Sing's praises, the heavens are ethereal, like an ancient mansion of commandments and immortals that lead the mountains. The little girl with the Su sign on the waist plate, her hands glowing brightly, covered with more talisman, a bit similar to the method of a sewing person. She appeared on her slender shoulders that resembled a Dharma image. Her figure was extremely small, but she was no more than an inch tall. She looked like a juvenile and was extraordinary, with a sword, wearing a red dress, a crown of hibiscus on her head, and the seam with snow-white dragon balls. The young monk wearing a veiled meditation attire hangs the Qin sign on the waistband, opens one eye and closes the other. When the eyes are closed, a whirlpool of lightning and thunder appears, and a flat mirror water surface appears under his feet. Among the dots of light, there are continuous lotus blossoms, swaying, blooming and falling, withering and falling into the water, and then slim and blooming, repeating itself again and again. In the afternoon, the Fulu Array Master refined an entire ancient cave sky that was incomplete. Su, the military cultivator, may be due to his young age and his physical strength. For the time being, he has only used sewing methods on his arms, but he can rely on some kind of magical powers of military strategists to break the rules. The ghost of an ancient sword fairy. Qin possesses a kind of supernatural powers of Buddhist meditation and visualization. The remaining 3 people, Jianxiu Mao, Confucian Kikaminyu, Taoist monk Wei, all have a good concealment and are not in a hurry to use their methods. Aunt Feng looked around and said with a smile, "I'm just here to reminisce about the past with half of my fellow villagers. You don't need to be so nervous. Put away all the ways to scare people." The 6 were indifferent, obviously not under her orders. Aunt Feng is not annoyed, there is nothing she can do, she is just an anonymous preacher, she is tired and lazy, so many years of teaching Taoism supernatural powers, it is a typical work without effort. If it is not for someone to supervise in the past, plus after a period of time, the results will be checked and she can just throw out a few pamphlets and leave it alone. Just like now, the 6 children are disobedient, and Aunt Feng will let them put on a battle. Anyway, it is not her who wastes energy and wasted spiritual energy. She continues to look at that Qin Pingan, smiles and asks, "I won't blame me for persuading you back then. Stop it?" Chen Pingan held sleeves with both hands, and 7 others including Aunt Feng as a sign of sincerity, smiled and said, "How can I blame the seniors?" Aunt Feng smiled, "Yo, reunion tonight," looking at the pleasant face, taking a mouthful of seniors and juniors, but listen to the tone, there is something in the words, Jianxian's temperament is not small. Chen Pingan asked in his heart, "Senior and Mr. Qi are familiar?" Aunt Feng found it interesting and did not give an answer. She smiled and asked, "Since you have become the close disciple of the old scholar, Qi Jingchun is your senior, why are you still calling Mr. Qi now?" Chen Pingan has sleeves with both hands, interlaced fingers with 10 fingers and slightly rickety. He smiled and said, "I am willing, I can call you whatever I like. Even if the seniors are in charge of everything, they really can't control this matter." Aunt Feng tutored, "After all, you have grown up and your temper will follow. I remember you were very good at talking when you were young." Chen Pingan smiled and said, "Don't hide from the predecessors, I am actually very good at talking now." Aunt Feng raised her hand, twisted the colorful knot with 2 fingers, smiling silently. Chen Pingan remained silent. The atmosphere was a bit cold for a while. At that time there were 5 openings on the covered bridge road. Old Man Yang, the drugstore, was the last one, and was the only one who could confirm the identity of Chen Pingan. This Auntie Feng was the one who spoke first when Chen Pingan walked forward. She whispered, naturally bewitching people's hearts, and she advised the young man to kneel down so she could be lucky. Among her words back then, aside from the most familiar Old Man Yang, compared to the tone of the other 4, she was the least arrogant, just like a woman who lives quietly in the mountains, she is free no matter what happened. I picked up the flower curtain, and saw the flowers sway in the wind in the courtyard, and then slightly dispelled the laziness, raised a little interest and said casually, "Don't leave the branch in a hurry." The second person who spoke was quite rude, calling Chen Pingan a common man, and knelt down quickly. The third person had a plain tone, as if he was talking about a reasonable truth. The fourth person, with a vicissitudes of voice and old-fashioned manner, finally warned Chen Pingan to not take the blame. However, the gods of the immortal family have unpredictable dispositions, deep thoughts, and plans that involve hundreds of thousands of years. Therefore those who speak harshly not necessarily malicious, and those who are gentle and drizzle may not be kind. The fierce man is ean and hostile, even if the voice is laughing, it is murderous. G people are peaceful, even if they are in a dream they are as kind. In short, no one, including Old Man Yang, hoped that he would keep going. Probably no one thinks that the mud leg of Nipping Lane that has broken the Chongqing Bridge is qualified, capable, and blessed to bear that great cause and effect. Except for Mr. Qi. Chen Pingan suddenly turned his head and looked at the girl in the formation. She immediately put away a magical power of her own life, not daring to look at this person's state of mind. She could only vaguely just now and saw a well in the world of conscience. When the blue shirt standing on the side of the eaves cast his eyes, in his heart at the mouth of the well, there seemed to be a pair of majestic golden eyes, even more pure than the gold and copper coins. He even turned against the object and looked at the mentality of her as a snoop. She knew that this was Chen Pingan reminding herself, "Don't watch what you shouldn't." She looked at people and could vaguely see a vague mental state. It was born and cultivated, but it was a matter of course. Just like whether a person can climb the mountain or not, it depends on God's willingness to reward this bowl of fairy rice. In addition to sword repair, Fulu and Wangqi are more difficult to learn, and they rely more on the innate qualifications of the Qi practitioner. Whether they can do it or not, it depends on whether the ancestors will reward them or not. The so-called qualifications of the Qintian supervisor training Qisher can be seen as a variety of innate roots. After all the children are born, Liju Dongtian is made of natal porcelain, and a drop of essence and blood is dripped. It is a means of inspection to judge the level of a person's future achievements with very little error. Liju Dongtian has existed for 3,000 years, and Dali was only a few hundred years old. It was a vassal of the Lu dynasty at the earliest. So who exactly gave Liju Dongtian the right to belong to Dali Song? Who taught this key technique to help Deus' rapid rise in the Northland? There are no written records of historical puzzles of all sizes. Senior brother Chui Yang and student Chui Dongshan seem to be abiding by a certain contract. As long as it is all the old yellow calendars related to the Liju cave, nothing is mentioned. My hometown is a small town, but a small cave with only a few thousand people. Chui Dongshan once ridiculed Liju Dongtian. He is the only one in the world with many shallow water kings, and the temple demon is windy. After just saying this, Chui Dongshan immediately folded his hands together, raised his head high, shaking vigorously and chanting. The Wu brand female formation teacher said with a heartfelt voice to a colleague, It is generally certain that Qin Pingan has nothing malicious or murderous towards us. But I can't guarantee that this must be the truth. Jian Xiao Mao, and the little girl from the military cultivator asked, "What is the chance of winning?" The little girl said, "Chopping melons and vegetables." Then added a word, "B." In fact, this seemingly innocent girl is the brains of the six. The other 5 people who are not in Dali capital are considered to be another small hill. Jian Xiao asked the young Taoist priest again, "What is the result of divination?" Taoist morale laughed and said, "It's like hitting the wall, but the sword fairy doesn't care about anything, otherwise I have to spit out the wine I drink into my stomach and fill a pot, it's not a problem." Jian Xiao pondered for a moment and said, "Then remove the formation. He is obviously the leader among the group, he is not yet at the age of a weak crown, and his cultivation level is not the highest, but he is the true backbone." When Jian Xiao made such a decision, the female formation division, the little soldier girl, and the little monk did not hesitate to put away their magical powers. Qin Pingan took advantage of the trend and glanced at the young swordsman. His eyebrows were somewhat similar to someone. Not surprisingly, his surname was Song and Gua. That Jian Xiao was the only one sitting on the ridge of the roof. After looking at each other with Qin Pingan, he was silent, as if he didn't even know the lord of the mountain. Qin Pingan stepped forward, leaving the upper eaves at the highest point, falling on the roof ridge and looking directly at the Ant Feng, and continued to ask in his own voice. Before the predecessor came to Dali capital, he had been living in the Liju cave for a long time and enlightened him? Ant Feng shook her head and smiled. "It is not suitable or dare to live for a long time. You were young and had never climbed the mountain. You may not be very clear. Qi Jingshun's temper is just for you, and for us who are unjustified survivors and prisoners. The thief, the control is much stricter, so I stayed more on Xuanhu mountain, occasionally stopping by. Before Qi Jingshun took over the cave, the saints of the past were still relatively loose. I would either take someone out of the Liju cave such as Chao Fan Yuan, or occasionally bring outsiders into the cave such as Gukan's father. But don't worry, I have nothing to do with Ma Xuanhuan and Xinghua Lane. No good feelings, no dislikes, good or bad. Of course, this is just my perception, and the rest of the people each has its own eyes." Qin Pingan believes that what she said is not only intuition, but also has enough context and clues to support this feeling. To use an officialdom analogy, Ma Xuanhuan, the proud son of heaven, is like a lavish son of a wealthy ancestor. In the local officialdom, he has a tendency to separatize the town, but he certainly cannot mobilize a book in Beijing. Ant Feng smiled and asked, "Qin Pingan, you already know my identity?" Qin Pingan did not hide and nodded. "If you only hear the name Feng Ant, you wouldn't dare to be so sure, but when the younger generation sees the knot with their own eyes, there is nothing to doubt. Of course you have to call seniors at such an age." She smiled sweetly. "I have a good memory and my eyesight is not bad. No wonder I was so polite to me." Qin Pingan smiled and said, "I implore seniors to answer my previous question." She asked, "Is it important to be unfamiliar with Qi Jingshun?" Qin Pingan nodded and said, "For me it's actually okay. For seniors it may be very important." She stretched out her hand and patted her heart, her face full of resentment, pretending to be horrified. "Threat and intimidate me? A 40-year-old young man who frightens a predecessor who is a few years old, what should I do?" Qin Pingan and this Ant Feng's heartfelt words. The other 6 people are not high in realm, naturally they can't listen to them, they can only watch the drama from the wall, and try to find the truth through the subtle changes in the eyes and faces of both sides. Qin Pingan smiled and said, "This is how seniors have wronged people. How can it be a threat? There is one thing to say. The anti-Feng in front of him is the of Sifeng, to be precise, one of them. That's why it appears to be so independent and immaculate. The reason couldn't be simpler. The wind in the world must be obedient to her. As for the 24 flower trade winds and the like, she is naturally within her jurisdiction." Qin Pingan was a hermit and entered the summer palace, only to see a few school notes about Ant Feng, which roughly explained her roots and feet. Ant Feng smiled and said, "A sword repairman in the Jade Pure realm and a Taoist companion in the Ascended realm, speaks hard." Qin Pingan nodded and smiled. "The wind is passing through the world and Zhu Fan does not stand upright. The hurt and green trees still remain. It is indeed not as tough as the seniors. This Andy Feng who took the initiative to show up here, the greatest possibility is to make an appearance for the Song family of Dali, which is equivalent to an invisible provocation." Qin Pingan didn't feel that her coming was something unexpected for her. If the appearance of Dong Hu, the Minister of Rights, is a good show, then the appearance of Andy Feng is indeed a very tough acting style. It's like telling yourself that you, Qin Pingan, don't know the details of the Dalisong family in this capital, so don't think about running wild here. Although this anti-Feng had not taken advantage of the situation to make up for the 12 high-ranking gods before 10,000 years, but in the Summer Palace, an ancient military book called Tai Gong Yin Talisman records a period of time, but it has long been lost. The Qi Ji way of telling the past. According to legend, there used to be 7 high-ranking gods with prominent powers. Each led their tribes to help the human race to cut the sky. Most of them fell in the war, only a few high positions remained, and they led their troops to live in the ancestral courtyard of the Howran military family. The gods and heavenly officials of the Rexian class each perform part of the avenue. It's just that the so-called high-ranking gods in the book do not clearly identify their identity, and it is even harder to say whether they belong to the earliest 12 high-ranking positions. Assuming that the general court of the Chinese army soldiers is the gate of a large mansion, then the ancestors of the ancestral soldiers of one continent, such as Jianghu Mountain and Fengxue Temple, are the side gates opened up. These ancient gods can also enter and leave them. In addition, a collection of ancient essays similar to Immortals and Ghosts records in detail the biggest catastrophe in the history of Baiwafuti, the catastrophe. It was this anti-Feng who came to the blessed land, who was called Feng Jia's servant by the flower of blessed land. She visited the house and walked through the mountains and rivers of the blessed land. Wherever she went, the wind was strong, the anger shouted, and the flowers were withered. Therefore, on top of that ancient book, there is also a magnificent essay at the end of the ancient book. At that time, Qin Pingan would drink a pot of wine and a plate of peanuts when he was free from war in the Summer Palace. There is no record of Feng anti in Shanghai Ji and supplementary Ji, as well as the numerous literati writings in the world. There are secret files with clear written records. Except for the merits of the Zhongtu Confucian Temple, there is absolutely no book in any other place in the Howran world, even the sect on the mountain and the thousands of magnates of the human dynasty. The children of later generations want to know, only through word of mouth from their ancestors, and to ensure that they will not be heard by the Confucian Academy, or even the head of a sect and the head of the family will need to go to the Gongda Lin of the Confucian Temple to play chess. Among the supporters of this woman Fengshen, there are many majestic emperors and monarchs in history. For example, there is a city lord of the night ship, the pavilion chief of Surabaya, who once killed the white snake. Aunt Feng suddenly said, "I almost forgot that you were the last hermit of the Great Wall of Jianghu." In fact, in the decades before Liz's cave sky shattered and fell to the ground, for a long-standing ancient existence like her, if it is not a critical juncture, when it encounters a key point, she is reluctant to look at it, maybe just sweep away for each of the present spiritual beings, just make sure that you have a number in your heart, and then at most betting on their own, which may be the result of interest, or may be a contest of vision to compete with whom. Qin Pingan smiled and the idioms were unsuccessful. Both parties seemed to be making a mess. Maybe it was because the drinking did not reach the door. You can ask Senior Aunt Feng to drink at the inn. Aunt Feng remembered something. She seemed a little surprised by Qin Pingan's patience. I don't ask the other old people who spoke back then, what is their origin and what are they asking for? Qin Pingan shook his head and smiled. If the senior is willing to say it, the junior is of course grateful. If the senior is not willing to say it, the junior can't force it. She stretched out her fingers together, tapped her cheek lightly, squinted and smiled as if she was hesitating to break the secret. Xinghua Lane, Makushuan, Nipping Lane, Songjisan, Fulu Street, Zhaoyao Taoya Lane, Xialing. These are just the youngest generation of Lizhu Dongtian, and in fact they have their own bets. Some are pure boring. When you see something that suits your heart's desire, you can do it easily and give some support. For example, one of the old guys is a contemporary ancestor with a line of human dragon breeders. The family ancestor was a good dragon. He hid his identity back then. He rushed from the central Earth Shenzhou all the way to Aquarius Island, isolated from the secrets of the sky, and hid in Nebo among the trainers of Zhanlong. Aunt Feng suddenly held back a smile and said for no reason, "It's really not tiring to walk a long way with a girl you like. At that time I was very courageous, but now I have a higher realm, but I am less courageous. I'm all worried for you." Qin Pingan's face changed slightly. When Aunt Feng saw the swordsman in the blue shirt at this moment, she finally had a familiar feeling and she finally looked like a young boy back then. Yo blushed with a guilty conscience. It's weird, isn't it, that Qin Yingguan of the Great Wall of Sword Chi can hold the city's head for another 10,000 years with his skin alone? Qin Pingan no longer deliberately rickets, took a deep breath, clasped his fists and smiled brightly. "Thank you, Senior, for taking care of him." Aunt Feng nodded and made it through at one point. She is indeed a smart and careful person, and she has been away from home for many years in her youth. She has maintained that early wisdom very well. Qi Jingchun has a very good vision. In the sky of Lizhu Cave, there are some scenes and time scrolls. After Qi Jingchun makes that decision, it is destined that no one can see it. As she said personally before, Qi Jingchun's temper is really not too good. After Qi Jingchun took the young man to the corridor bridge, he made a rule with everyone to take care of his eyes and not to look at the young man in Mud Bottle Alley. One of the old guys broke the rules and was once cleaned up by Qi Jingchun and almost wanted to take the initiative to reincarnate. She is the only exception. It's not that she is optimistic about Chen Pingyan's bet, but the illusion of burning the dragon's forehead with wormwood, in her early years, because she once had so much protection for the real dragon under the sky. Aunt Feng nodded, no longer speaking in her heart, and said softly, "On the side of the capital, I have a place to stay on the side of the Huoshan temple." Qin Pingan clasped his fist and said, "I turned my head back but had a private business. I must go there to meet seniors." She reminded, "Before you come, remember to say hello. Someone has long wanted to see you." It is not easy for him to go out every time, so he has to report to the Ministry of Etiquette. In fact, Qin Pingan had a few prospective candidates in his mind, such as the treasurer of the drugstore in his hometown Yang, and the General Su Gaoshan who accompanied the Emperor's temple. It's just that on the side of the predecessors, I won't be shook up with these little cleverness. Anyway, I will meet each other sooner or later. Aunt Feng's eyes were extremely humane and gentle, and she sighed, "It's not easy to get to this point in just a few decades. If you leave, it won't delay your busy business." Qin Pingan is looking at his shirt. Dressed in a green shirt as a salute. There was a lot of spring breeze in my hometown. There was once a year when spring went very late and summer came very late. Aunt Feng treated it calmly. I did such a big favor to Qi Jingchun, but what if he was thanked by his younger brother, and didn't have a single snowflake? Before leaving, Aunt Feng and this young man who never let Qi Jingchun down, reminded in their hearts, "Except me, you have to be careful. By the way, one of them is in the capital." Qin Pingan straightened up and smiled. "The juniors have always been very careful, so they should also be careful." Aunt Feng nodded, and the rabbit flew like a flock, flying all the way, not fast or slow, not at all speed. Qin Pingan was full of emotion. It turned out that Senior was also an expert who was proficient in falling down and liked to hide. In the last scene on the roof, Qin Pingan and the Andy Feng surprised these young talents. I thought that the sect master of Luapa Mountain, who was making trouble on Xingyang Mountain, would have a fight when he arrived at Dei capital. As a result, when I saw Aunt Feng, I was so respectful. In my words, I always insisted on the younger generation's salute, and would he give this great gift when he came? In fact, among the preachers, this woman has spent the longest time with the 11, but she did not teach any clever Taoism, but only taught a few ways to escape with them. The little girl widened her eyes, turned around, quickly craned her neck, smiled and beckoned and shouted, Aunt Feng, turn around and invite you to drink good wine. The fairy house wine in Changchun Palace is expensive." The little monk folded his hands together, nodded toward the figure of the Aunt Feng and said, "The monks don't talk, and the Auntie Feng is so beautiful tonight." Jianxiu stretched out his fingers, pressed his eyebrows, and spread out so many like-minded colleagues, without seeing or hearing. However, as long as you are not a fool, you should understand one thing afterwards. Everyone has definitely underestimated the realm and identity of that Aunt Feng. Qin Pingan is about to leave, and there is nothing to talk about with these cultivating geniuses, just walking on the Yangguan Road on a single wooden bridge. As long as the Dali Song clan is not mad, he will not let this promising young genius come to his own trouble. Never thought that Jianxiu hugged his fist and said, "Jingqing Rinshi, Jianxiu Song Su, have seen Lord Qin Shan." Qin Pingan had to stop, smiled and nodded. The Jindan Jianxiu who is less than 20 years old is terrifying. Song Su looked awkward. Since Song Su, who is the leader of the eldest brother, has signed up for his own account, the other 5 people will learn the same way. After all, the opportunity is rare, and a few more words with this famous hermit will make money. The Confucian gas trainer called out Mr. Qin, claiming to be a scholar at the Old Mountain Cliff Academy of Dei, and did not go to Sui to continue his studies. He had served as a monk in the army for several years. The young formation teacher, the woman named Han Zhoujin, said that she came from the blessed land of Qingtan under the jurisdiction of the gods. The girl from the military family has the surname Yu. Not surprisingly, this Qianlu pavilion is considered her home. The Taoist priest had a public identity and served as the Daelu of the capital. He was named Guling from Jurong in the southeast boundary of Aquarius Island. A young monk wearing a veiled meditation dress, claiming to be a young novice monk from the translation bureau. The little girl seemed to be out of the mood and smiled and said a few more words. Grandmaster Qin, I heard that your old man had a fight with Chao Ci in Gongdalan. It was earth-shattering. I heard that she was very handsome and punched. Chao Ci's face is swollen. Are you considered honorable despite defeat? Qin Pingan has never seen such a little girl who doesn't know how to chat. Do you think you are Gu Jianlong? Besides, the small chats these guys had before sitting in the village were not very polite. If I remember correctly, it was this little girl who looked at the careless girl and threatened to know herself for a while, and I couldn't miss it when I passed by. Listening to the words of Guling again, it seems that she had been with Pei Qian and asked about the boxing, but after a full month, she yelled that the liver hurts every day. When that Han Zhoujin said something fair, saying, our hidden official looks good, the little girl started to thimble again, saying that Sister Han, what kind of eyes do you have? It is obvious. So Qin Pingan smiled and said, people in the arena, misfortune comes from the mouth, and if you speak too much, you will lose. This is still unfamiliar. Otherwise, if you change to the big disciple of the mountain, you will often squat outside the Kalangxiang shop, hold the mouth of a dog's head lying on the ground, and teach the left guardian of Kalangxiang to let him in the future. You will walk around, don't yell, be careful when you speak. I know many friends from the rivers and lakes who slaughter pigs and slaughter dogs and open butcher shops. Not convinced. As for why Qin Pingan was able to understand the conversation here, of course it was due to the magical power of Jing Zongyi's flying sword. This natal flying sword has a lot of transformable swords, and the number depends on Qin Pingan's realm. After Qin Pingan entered the capital, he sacrificed several flying swords made by Jing Zhongyue and flew in secret. Han Zhoujin glanced at the moonlight on a branch of an ancient cypress not far away, jokingly saying, Mr. Qin is a sword fairy from the upper 5 realms, right? You must be defensive. Be careful to sail the boat for 10,000 years. Qin Pingan looked complacent, raised his sleeves, waved at will, and put a sword of light into his sleeves. The sword light seemed to have blended with the moonlight, so there was no trace. Song Su was impressed. He is Jianxiu, so he knows the weight of Qin Ping's hand most. Flying swords transform the void and hide somewhere. As long as it is a sword repairer, anyone can. However, the spiritual energy between heaven and earth is not static or unsteady. If the talisman is refined into the sword and the sword intent is melted, it is just that this kind of magic superimposes its advantages and disadvantages. The advantage is that it is difficult to find traces, and the trajectory of the flying sword is more hidden. The disadvantage is that it damages the purity of Feijian and affects its killing power. And Qin Pingan's sword light is like a long river of time, with fish swimming in the water. Like a fish swimming around the water body. The hidden official just shook his arm, let Song Su know the gap. In short, if Qin Pingan really wants to commit murder tonight, as you said earlier, he can cut melons and vegetables, he can kill him at will. Of course, they are not without some unreasonable back players, but against this hidden official of the Great Wall of Sword Qi, it is true that they have no chance of winning. There is nothing embarrassing to admit, anyway. The 5 sword fairy embryos of Jiaxin account, they are the top geniuses of a whole barren world, and their elaborate siege failed. And the 6 of them, after all, are just the so-called top-notch. Qin Pingan had changed their familiar faces and planned to leave. After all, Dong Hu was still waiting at the entrance of the alley. Qin Pingan was willing to nostalgia for the old servant who had met when he was a teenager. Guling called out Qin Jianxian. Qin Pingan doubted, is there anything else? Guling pointed to a place and said helplessly, the trail is so shallow, what can be done? But Qin Jiangxian's other flying sword, can you put it away? The trail's back is chilly and I always feel panicked. Qin Pingan nodded and praised, Xiao Xianzhen's wise eyes are like torches, like opening the sky. Guling clasped his fists on his chest, shook it lightly and said with a smile, Qin Jianxian is so admirable, I dare not be it. But you can borrow Qin Jiangxian's good words to be promoted to the Fairy King sooner. It's easy to talk and talk. If it's a match, I have a lot of good words here. Qin Pingan smiled and waved again, a sword light gathered into his sleeve and then another. There are 6 sword lights in total. There are 6 people on the roof, everyone has a share. Guling and Han Zhoujin, who was a formation teacher, looked at each other and laughed bitterly. The 2 of them, among the 6, are already the monks who are best at surveying the heavens and the earth's spirit and looking for clues. The little girl turned her head, this time she has learned well, knowing to look away, and then muttered, it's really insidious, not decent. They are all sword fairies and they bullied us little earth fairies like this. Qin Pingan stretched out a finger, knocked on his ear and said with a smile, this girl, she would rather hit people than swear, and don't be heard when she swears. She is still the old rule of walking the rivers and lakes. The little girl pecks at the rice, although I don't know why Qin Jianxian is so nagging, but I think it is reasonable. Qin Pingan smiled and said, "Excellent, excellent. Being able to accept good words and words, such as the people who have accumulated a lot of money in the city, become a rich man with a wealth of money." Talking about money, right? She loves to hear these words, and she is more pleasing to the swordsman in blue shirts at once. Guling smiled and said, "Qin Jianxian actually passed by Xiaoguan before, and the trail is temporarily practicing there, and there is still tea for guests. It's the small Taoist temple under the administration of Chongshu Bureau, which manages the affairs of the Daomen of the capital." Chen Pingan didn't have any polite remarks, so let's forget it, no longer stay here, and his figure disappeared on the roof of Tianlu Pavilion. As soon as Chen Pingan left, there was still silence. After a while, the young Taoist put away a magical power and said that he should have really gone. The little girl sighed, looked at the Confucian trainer, and said that I was pulling Chen. Pingan has talked so much, how many words has he said, or is it not? The latter shook his head, just said all the words without moving. As a result, another sword light flashed. The little monk folded his hands together. "Buddha bless nothing tonight. Tomorrow I will go to the merit box to donate incense money." Yu stomped. "Is it annoying? My grandmother finally understands why Jiashin's account has suffered. I'm in a high state and I still don't know how to do things." Song Su smiled and reminded, "When he was ambushed on the Great Wall of Jianxi, Mr. Chen's cultivation level is actually not high. They were too lazy to change places, so they sat down on the roof, drank and practiced spiritually." According to the plan of the national teacher Cui Yang, within the next 100 years, within the southern border of Aquarius Island, a sect, 11 Qi practitioners, at least the Yupu realm, and a territorial martial artist will suddenly appear. Founded the sect. Everyone present, plus the other 5, will be the founder of the mountain. Every suzerain must be a disciple of a Confucian academy, and at least he must be a gentleman. If you are embarrassed to do things in the two Confucian temple, I will start the Dali dynasty first and try to see the effect. The strategy that when Hai Zhoumi gave back then, Howren does not need to deny it all. Because of people's waste, it is contrary to the knowledge of work. Han Zhoujin lay down on his back and murmured with a smile, "The hidden officer really looks good." Yu sat cross-legged and rolled her eyes. The last sword light quietly disappeared. It seemed that just such a sincere and unintentional words from the female formation teacher scared off a flying sword of the young hermit. Dong, who was left aside by the young mountain lord before. The old attendant felt helpless, but he didn't get very angry. "The things we talked with the mountain lord tonight are of great importance. Don't wait for a while at Qin Pingan." He didn't return like this, so he waited till dawn, and the old man didn't complain. Dong, who glanced at the alley not far away. The old Yuanying named Lu Jia, who was recorded in the ceremonial department, stood in place, closed his eyes and meditated, practicing spiritual cultivation. "Why don't you make a soaring?" As for the young man from the Zhao family in Tianshui, squatting on the ground licking a handful of peanuts, saw the sight of the old servant, and stretched out his hand. Dong, who waved his hand with a smile. Eat, your grandfather and your father are all fat people." It seems that although the old attendant did not complain, he was a bit angry. "I really don't know what the Chinese teacher thought back then, so I found such an old antique guardhouse that closed the door and only knew how to practice. He doesn't make money, he never takes a half step out of the alley all year round, but what about Zhao Duanming, doesn't he talk to the preacher about outside affairs?" The young hippie smiled and said, "Grandpa Dong, don't look at me, you don't know. Every time I go out, I only go to Chao Jugui to eat and drink, chat and fart, and I don't talk about business at all. Let's talk about it. If an unscrupulous person runs out of his mouth, what can be serious?" Dong Hu, the old servant, according to official rules, although he had a good relationship with Zhao and Tianshui, he could not be regarded as the person who spoke to Zhao and Tianshui in the temple. In fact, among the surnames of Shangzhou state, Zhao was in the officialdom of the capital. Wait. Because the official plate of the Tianshui Zhao family in Dei is mainly the two pieces of the Ministry of Households and the Ministry of Industry, and they are not top-notch, no one becomes the chief official. However, the mahjong of the Dei court has always been firmly controlled by the Tianshui Zhao family, so the relationship with the border army can be imagined. To Zhao Duanming, a cultivator who has clearly given up his identity as the head of the future Tianshui patriarch, the old maid is no stranger to him. There is no stranger to the old attendant. In Ichi Lane, he will meet each other when he walks through the house during the holidays. The creator, when he was a child, often led a group of his peers in Ichi Lane, and killed them mightily, fighting against the Seed brothers of the same age on Cheer Street. These two streets with the longest history in Dali, each generation has a child king, there are only a few children. They had no swollen noses and swollen faces when they were young, and they would have their own coup-headed sergeants, who were responsible for reading military books and helping to line up troops, but if they really wanted to fight they would not talk about the rules and regulations. For example, those who are a generation older than Zhao Duanming, Chao Gingxin, Lu Xuanmei etc., are also in the same situation. However, Chao Gingxin is the most insidious. He specializes in dealing with girls in two streets. Before every fight, he will whisper to them and ask for money from those who are sisters and sisters, saying that he can take people to protect so-and-so. It can be guaranteed that whoever gets a few punches at least can stand home. This guy has business savvy. He knew that he would hire people to build wooden knives and bamboo knives at a young age. Every time he fanned fire and caused a fight, he would start distributing weapons. Of course it was a lease and he had to pay. Because children born in Ichi Lane, the bigger the official hats of their ancestors in officialdom, they are often beaten by Cheer Street, and if they are caught they will be beaten to death. As for Yuan Jingding, who was about the same age as Chao Gingxin, he didn't like to mix up these messy things at a young age, which was extremely special. Earlier there was also a group of patrolling envoy Chao Ping, and Father Guan liked to watch these slapsticks the most when he was alive. The most detrimental thing was the old man at the back door of Guan's house, stacked all year round. Bricks, no money, just take them away. That's how Donghu came here. A few sons, to today's grandsons, and even a few granddaughters, no matter whether they like fighting or not, there is no shortage of beatings and being beaten. Every time the child is on the battlefield. Soldiers, whoever dares not to go will be xenophobic afterwards. Therefore, there has always been a saying in the officialdom of Dei that people who have not borrowed the bricks of the Guan family will generally not have any great prospects. Donghu thinks that such a big city is very good. In the two streets, there are both childish and childish reading and cries of fighting. After all, Donghu was old and he was not in the court anyway, so he squatted on the side of the road with his back against the corner. Lu Jia opened his eyes and said with a smile, "A servant like a big official would also squat on the ground. It is insulting to be gentle and out of style." After all, the old monk was not blind and deaf, and no matter what happened outside, there were still some gossips from friends. I only heard that this old magistrate, who had been in the office of the Ministry of Rights for half his life, was in the officialdom. His knees were not too hard, and his general publicity was average. Of course, these official affairs, he is a layman, and he would not really think that this high official, who never said hard words, must be a counselor. After all, the officialdom of Dali, especially the temples in the capital, is really ruthless, and there are many who do not say ruthless things but do ruthless things. Donghu said in a huff, "Lao Tzu is not you gods who don't need to eat. You every day. You can't squat, stand and pull, huh?" Tonight, His Majesty the Emperor urgently summoned him to enter the palace to discuss matters, and then put on such a chore. The longer the old attendant waited, the mood gradually deteriorated, especially the peach blossom eyes of the Empress Dowager at that time, narrowed to seep. But in fact, Dong Hu's impression of the young mountain owner of the Downfall Mountain is not bad, and even Dong Hu always thinks that the old Liju Cave sky is really good feng shui. So talented people come out in large numbers. The Ministry of Etiquette is in charge of the landscape of a country, and he is the Lord Minister, and he knows a lot about the inside story. Even if it was the unruly Ma Kuxuan, in the midst of battles, how could he slacken off? In addition, there are Zhao Yu, who is already an official in the capital, and Lin Shui, who is now in the capital. Which one is not a genius among geniuses? Lu Jia smiled and said, "The servant lady will continue to squat and drink northwest wind." Dong Hu turned his head and exhaled angrily, "Duanming, let's knock some peanuts." Zhao Duanming shook his wrist and stood up to clap his hands. "Nothing." Lu Jia smiled while stroking his beard, a good apprentice and one mind with the master. In fact, Qin Pingan had already returned to the vicinity of the alley, but he did not show up in a hurry. He didn't deliberately put on airs. He just wanted to see more of the patience of the old attendant. Conscience is when the night is clear. By the side of the river where the lights were as bright as the day before, a wine bureau finally dissipated. The young officials resisted the swelling of alcohol and said goodbye to the seniors who had bigger official hats until they were gone. Immediately stretched out his hand to cover his mouth, ran all the way to the river, squatting and vomiting on the stomach, retching, and tears came out. Drinking is uncomfortable, and I feel even more uncomfortable. Han Chuang studied hard for 20 years and finally became an official, but he wanted to smile at the wine table. The old man from his hometown squatted aside and patted the young man on the back. This young man was hailed by Li Sherlin as Toshihiko, who, articles are like snow. If you don't have enough talent, you will accept your fate, but if you have a tall talent, you have to wrong yourself at the wine table like this. Then you feel wronged. What's wrong? If the young people don't feel wrong, then the old people don't need to lead the young people. The young man raised the back of his hand, wiped the corners of his eyes, smiled bitterly and tremblingly said, "Master, even if I only drink 1 drink a month, I can't bear it. When will I be tall?" The old man smiled and said, "When you become a high official, you can drink less if it is someone's turn to invite you to drink. If you are in a good mood and the drinks are good, drink more." The young man turned his head and retched, drank the river, lowered his head to rinse his mouth and then sat on the ground. He could no longer vomit and finally felt better. The old man sat on the side steps and smiled and said, "People say that heaven can't help people rich and noble and people alone are free. In officialdom, of course, it will only be less leisure. Just get used to it. But there is a saying that used to be my imperial examination room. The teacher told me that the same thing is that after the wine bureau today, his old man said that no matter how much you study, if you still don't know how to be close to humans, you should not be an official at all, because scholars should learn to understand the world." Having said that, there was a pause and the old man smiled while stroking his beard. "So you kid, you have to pay it back." The red-faced young man became more and more self-confident and said softly, "Master, you can only owe the money for drinks." The old man laughed and said, "Don't worry, I will pay it back when I have money. I'm still strong. You can save your salary first, my wife. It's not easy to live in Beijing. If you want to marry a local beautiful girl, more money wasted." Seeing that the young man was still a little embarrassed, the old man smiled and said, "A gentleman establishes a career, and he is poor and not ashamed." The young official shook his head, bowed and thanked the old man silently. There is still a grievance left before, but there are not so many. The old man and the young man walked together on the street. It was late at night and still lively. Another wine game also ended. The man smiled and asked, "How?" The two fairies smiled. "It is true that they have misunderstood the elders of the division. But I can't blame them for thinking too much, not to mention just talking about a company wine, how unpleasant to spread it out. The scholar who is a member of the criminal department, Weilang, is indeed a gentleman. The things we talked about at the banquet in the past were mostly the customs of the hometown. Of course, we also said some official scenes such as the hope that their sects and genealogical masters can go down the mountain more. In addition to the red dust experience, they should also benefit the country. Sheltered the people in one place. In the river, a Tsing-yi hovered over the water, looking up at the restaurant lights on the bank of the Calamus River. The god of the Champu River, because the river section is not long, the landscape is not high and the 6th grade. This is because of the feet of the emperor. Otherwise, he will be in charge of such a small water area that his colleagues laughed as a few buckets of water. Locally, I found a he-bo douchuan that was worthy of the official ranks. A mansion aquaman next to him hurriedly reached out to dissipate the nasty running water, so as not to dirty the official robes of his water master, then rubbed his hands and smiled, "Master, this street is really unthinkable. It is so noisy all night long. I can't bear it." Sure enough, the master is big and the prime minister can hold a boat in his belly. If the master goes to the court to be an official, it will be fine, at least one of the hall officials will start. The river smiled and said, "Could it be that you drank too much and talked about drunken things? He has been here for hundreds of years. Anyway, since the first day of the establishment of Dali, he has been the of water on the Changpu River, so he has seen almost all the emperors, generals, civil servants and generals, and he has also been arrogant. The domineering, extravagant and desperate generations, the fierce generals of the Fanjin came to Beijing, and they were even more in groups. This Calamus River has the deepest memory and is rather strange. It is not someone who has accomplished some feat, or who has become the rebellious courtier who tried to usurp the country and ruined his reputation, but in the last 100 years, those old official robes and official boots that are heavily worn are hung around the waist with cheap jade pendants of crude materials and unacceptable carvings. Even to this day, especially in Ichi Lane and Cheer Street, many officials participating in the court will change their official robes and boots, but the jade pendant still does not change. This seems to be an unwritten rule in the officialdom of Dei. I heard that there was a dynasty meeting. A stunned young man who came from a high school and entered the officialdom, one day changed a piece of jade pendant, which is priceless. In the end, Mr. Guan had many sharp eyes. The first thing he noticed was that he called friends and called friends. A bunch of central and important ministers gathered around the young official to watch the fun. They all envied each other, asked the price and praised the carving work well. This made the young official embarrassed. Later in the middle of the night, the young people first came here to drink their sorrows, and then saw that there was no one around. They were so aggrieved that they wailed, saying that these old foxes were ganged up to disgusting people, bullying people and innocent wealth, and bought the jade pendant. Why can't you hang it? Later, the officer of the Dali military department, who was young and then no longer young, was still a civilian. In a battle for the city, he died on the battlefield with the capital. During a court meeting in the capital, a few old people who were very old, after retreating, these old guys who had once laughed at the stunned young man walked out together, and then stood together somewhere outside the palace with their arms folded. Those old people who had long been dazzled and deaf with loose teeth, and could no longer laugh loudly, did not say anything. They seemed to hear the clanging sound. Therefore this calamus river feels sincerely that only this century-old Dali capital can be really intoxicating. It seems that generations of young people will have so much pride in the temple or on the battlefield as many drinks have been drunk. A faint sword light flashed away. In this brightly lit place the gods could not predict this sword light. Like the water of calamus, he didn't notice it. Chen Pinggan sat on a wall not far from the alley, tucked his sword light into his sleeves, and put his cheek in one hand, slightly smiling. Standing up, falling on the street, went to see the old servant Donghu. Inside the Dali palace, His Majesty the Emperor and the Empress Dowager sat opposite each other in a small room. Next to Song He there was a young woman named Yu Mian, who was the Queen of Dei, who was born in the Yu family of Zhu Kingdom. Without any Dali civil and military officials to accompany the discussions, it was like just a family chat. Yu Mian was holding a ball fan, tilted his body slightly, leaning on the flower table, and helping His Majesty the Emperor to fan gently. Because the house is not big and there is no window open tonight, the heat is not small. Yu is the surname of all Xianxia countries, which is relatively far from officialdom. Nowadays in name, it only cares about all the official silk and tea services of Dali in the local area. Compared with the mother-in-law next to her, Yu Mian, the daughter-in-law of the Song family, is really not well known, and even in the court, there is no such thing as viable. At most, they are participating in the sacrifices as usual, or chatting with those who enter the palace. Song He asked softly, "Can't the Empress hand over the broken piece of porcelain? Do not confuse family affairs and state affairs. What's more, what the Song family wants to get is already in the bag, so why bother with such a small matter? What are you keeping? Useless." In fact, news came from the Qingtian supervisor at that time, and by the way he took a landscape painting of Xinjiang Mountain in Guyunla and into the palace, copied it down, and handed it to His Majesty the Emperor. As soon as Song He saw Qin Ping's actions at the time, he knew that this matter would definitely be a lot of trouble. The woman suddenly angrily said, "When is the family affairs of the House of the Son of Heaven not a state matter anymore? The monarch of a country, the prince of the 95 years, this is simple. I want me to teach you?" She stretched out a palm and held the case table. He Qin Pinggan, as a citizen of Dali, got a few bags of gold and fine copper from a mud-legged man in those days, and he got a few bags of gold and copper money to buy Shirlu Pashan. Zongman, for so many years, when did he have a good face with the Dali court? He even deliberately turned a blind eye to the Longzhou area, from the superintendent office to the provincial governor, the county governor, and the county magistrate. Do you want a contact? Luapa Mountain established the sect, even without passing through my Dali imperial court, causing our Dali Song clan to lose face to the Middle-earth Confucian temple. This is his Qin Pinggan sincerity? Hey, you can pull the bamboo emperor to drink tea at the first line Fengzhu Shirtang. It has only been a few years in Luapa Mountain, so I dare to be so impudent. In a few years will I come here for tea? Your Majesty, are you planning to let me serve him tea and water? The emperor could only smile wryly. And Queen Dali always lowered her brows and pleasing to the eye, her attitude was weak. She put down the ball fan, placed it gently, silently, picked up a tangerine from the porcelain basin, with 5 fingers like green onions, cut the orange with a thin hand, and then gently handed it to the emperor. In fact, the woman didn't like this daughter-in-law too much. She was too clever and sensible, too submissive, too sharp and introverted. In short, she was too much like the woman she was when she was young. However, this marriage was arranged by the Emperor Xian himself, and the national teacher specifically arranged it. How could she dare to say nothing? The woman talked more and more angry and slapped the table. "Song He, don't forget, I am the foundation of the country." She turned to look at Yu Mian. "Go down." The queen immediately got up, grabbed her to say goodbye, and then picked up the ball fan. Song He frowned slightly and was about to grab her hand. The woman's fingers moved slightly, shaking quietly. Song He knowingly smiled and stopping her from leaving. The woman pretended not to see the little gesture of her daughter-in-law. She just sneered in her heart, "Who Maisie? Really more vixen than vixen." When Yu Mian left, the woman immediately no longer looked very annoyed and said with a gloomy face, "Don't forget the word harmony. This Chen Pingan knows about this and you think he has never met before. Are you closer to the Song Mu who has been a neighbor for many years? Don't forget, in the Dada temple, you should be the one who walked with Chen Pingan who was lucky enough to return home. Song Jisin in Ni Ping Alley is the feudal Lord Song Mu accompanied by Dali, not your majesty." The emperor was silent. The woman smiled and said, "Your majesty, leave it alone. I know how to deal with Chen Pingan." Empress Dali Yumian walked slowly in the corridor, and a few court ladies who followed her not far behind her were light-footed and well-mannered, but none of them looked like walking on thin ice. Yumian would occasionally ask about some strange people and interesting things about the Liju cave. His Majesty would only say that one of them was one thing she remembered deeply. He heard that the young mountain owner who grew up eating 100 schools of food, after his success, Luapa Mountain and the shop in Chilong Alley will still take care of the neighbors in the neighborhood. Whenever a woodsman rests at the gate of Luapa Mountain, a little girl in black who is in charge of the gate will serve out tea. She puts a table on the side of the road during the day and takes it back at night. So in fact she had a good feeling for that Luapa Mountain. Because I feel very similar to my natal family. But she thinks so, what can she do? It doesn't matter how she thinks. She turned her head and looked towards the night. The bright moon was in the sky, and she didn't know whether it was cloudy or sunny or gusty. She only knows one truth. A wealthy gateway, often with poor relatives, never return empty-handed. It is a loyal home. Passing by the high gate, the people will not like to avoid disasters and deliberately walk through quickly. It is the gate of goodness. Outside the alley at Renyuniyun Tower, Qin Pingan clasped his fists and smiled. "Let Dong Shilang wait a long time." Dong, who just saw a blue shirt on the street and immediately got up. When he heard these words, his heartstrings became even more tense. And the second sentence of this young man with many identities made Dong Hu's mood even more complicated. He didn't know whether to be happy or worried. Because Qin Pingan smiled and said, "I'm sorry." Dong Shilang returned to the palace to report that he really wanted to talk, so let the woman come here to talk in person, or I'm going to her house as a guest. Dong Hu asked softly, "Really?" Qin Pingan turned his head, looked at the elderly coachman who seemed to be napping and asked, "Is it not pleasing to my eyes?" Dong Hu is one big and too big. The coachman didn't even look at you from beginning to end. Qin Pingan. The old coachman opened his eyes and said indifferently, So what? Qin Pingan smiled and said, "Sure enough." He was the second senior who spoke. The old coachman twitched his mouth. "Practicing?" Just as Qin Pingan was about to speak, he suddenly raised his head, and saw a whirlpool suddenly appeared over the entire Aquarius Island, and then a sword light went straight down to the city of Dali capital. Qin Pingan knew that he was right to leave the inn on his own initiative, otherwise he must have been beaten. Because the man who played the sword was the Ning Yao who was lying on the table and thinking more and more annoyed. As a result, he saw this old and selling old coachman practicing your mother's training. Sword of Coming Chapter 831. The sword light from the sky, straight, descended on the world. As a result, the old coachman was like a wooden man standing still, arrogant and dry, stuck in the same place, abruptly hit by the sword light, but he held his hands high and forcibly took the sword. Anyway, in the eyes of the veteran infant Lu Jia who was in charge of guarding the alleys and roads, he was so heroic and immediately admired. He never thought that in the city of Dali, there was such a hero who was able to find him to have a chance to drink. The next moment, the old coachman was pierced by a sword, and he was trapped a dozen miles under the city of Dali capital. On the street, a well-sized pit appeared on the street. Because the sword light was too sharp, the surrounding ground was nothing. Crack. But in Qin Pingan's eyes it's not as simple as that. In fact, when the sky vortex appeared, the old coachman began to operate some magical powers, making the human body like a glass city, like a dojo made up of thousands of glass. This old man who chose to hide himself like Fengshen was absolutely unwilling to carry that sword light. At the same time, the old coachman squinted in the direction of the central city, obviously waiting for the light of the sword over there to appear, using his sword against the sword. It's just that, for some reason, Dali imitated by Yujing as if he hadn't noticed it. He was clearly a sword immortal of the ascending realm. So the moment the sword light fell from the vortex, the old coachman shrank the mountains and rivers without hesitation, stepped out of the capital in one step, and appeared in the land of Jianghu 100 miles away, and then his body shattered like colored glaze. Hundreds of colorful streamed fireflies were made, and they suddenly dispersed, fleeing in all directions. As a result, hundreds of murderous sword lights appeared in the vortex of the sky, one by one pointed accurately to the escape direction of the old coachman's stream firefighter's figure. The old coachman had to gather the colored glazed light, put the pure divinity into his place, bite the bullet and shrank the mountains and rivers again, and return to the streets of the capital, because only the first sword light has the least killing intention and the most shallow killing intent. What? It seems that Ning Yao is talking to the old coachman about the simplest truth. If you don't run away, you will lead your sword. If you run away, you will ask the sword. These are all things in a flash, a capital city. I am afraid that apart from Qin Pingan and Aunt Feng, who looked up at the fire temple, few people can detect the old coachman's hundreds of turns. Under the earth, the old coachman stood in the air, draped in golden armor, and his hands and feet were surrounded by golden dragons. A vortex of flowing golden blood appeared at the feet of the old man. The body of the ancient gods was actually consumed by a sword. The old man is like standing at the bottom of a water well. The whole sword well is worthy of the name. Numerous small sword chi crisscrosses, and the pure sword intent is almost transformed into substance, making a well head thick like mercury flowing out, and there is also a continuous movement in it. Swordsmanship, this makes the water well round wall even appear a kind of Taoism trace resting on the mountain. This is a well-deserved fairy trail, and can even be regarded as a piece of supremacy that can be used by later generations of swordsmen to devote themselves to the realization of a century. Sword Sutra. A young woman carrying a sword box, standing in a long river of slender water like a stream. Since she is outside the five elements, the soil and roots under the capital of Delhi are naturally not restricted to her figure. The sword is hovering. Ning Yao, it was just a slight movement of mind, and all traces of swordsmanship in a well were broken, and then he asked, "Practice?" Qin Pingan's questioning boxing between Gongdalin and Chao Ci in the Confucian temple is not suitable for the near future. It is a medicine jar. Zheng Yangshen's questioning sword is an old account accumulated for many years. Ning Yao is not easy to stop, but in this big city of Lijiang, Qin Pingan only came to the Empress Dowager Empress for an explanation, so in addition, whether it was Aunt Feng or the coachman, whoever wanted to attack Qin Pingan had to ask her first and nod her head. The old coachman said in a deep voice, "Have you ever killed a high position in the colorful world?" Ning Yao asked back, "So what, so what?" 2 words from the old coachman and Qin Pingan. Ning Yao just returned to the old coachman. The old coachman was silent for a moment. I asked Qin Pingan to join hands. "What does it have to do with you as a foreigner?" In fact, what the old coachman meant was that in this big city, Qin Pingan and I had to go through the old accounts or practice. At least tonight, no one would die. You, Ning Yao, are a foreigner, so what are you doing? Besides, you are already the #1 person in the colorful world. Every time you shoot a sword in Howren, you should carefully weigh the weight of the rules of the heavens, and the conflict between the 2 worlds in the avenue of heaven. After Effects. It's okay not to say this sentence. Ning Yao's sword intent is fairly stable and he is not murderous. When the old coachman said something, he noticed something was wrong, as if this Ning Yao listened to the words and accepted the literal meaning, but did not listen to the old coachman's meaning. Ning Yao squinted and smiled. Senior said something fair. I have nothing to do with that guy. Going to ask for relatives, the matchmaker's words, and posting in return after so many years, there is really nothing. If it is said that in the Great Wall of Sword Chi, there are all kinds of reasons, such as the boss sword fairy saying nothing, wait until he has returned home safely, he has come to Howren with the sword, that guy is still so stupid. 1 Procrastination. I like him, so I don't say anything. Besides, there are some things. What should a woman say, how to speak? Which green onion are you? Come to remind me, Ning Yao. Next moment, the old coachman's figure was shot out of the ground with a single sword. Ning Yao once again smashed him out of Aquarius Island and fell into the sea. The old coachman leaned into the sea, and a huge waterless land appeared. Like a big bowl, stirred up layers of stormy waves in all directions, completely disrupting the water transportation within 1,000 miles. The old coachman knelt on one knee, vomiting blood, full of golden blood, but the old man was horrified to discover that the place where he fell was actually a hidden hometown, where is the CI mausoleum. And here, could it actually lead to that brand new world? Ning Yao's high-level deity in the colorful world is one of the 12 high levels under the armored man, the single-eyed? Otherwise, how can she see through the ancient ruins and savage plots that were not found in the Middle-earth Confucian temple? Ning Yao expressionlessly, get out of the way, don't hinder the sword. If the old coachman is amnesty, he will go away in an instant, make up his mind, avoid his edge and not go to Dali. Ning Yao slightly shifted his sight, squinted his eyes and said, "It is for you to go back to the capital city of Dali and relive the old with someone. If you agree, go your own way. If you don't agree, you can just run away. Hiding, if I can't find you, count me as losing." Ning Yao Yujin hovered above the sea and only said 2 words, "Come here." The colorful world, countless sword auras condensed, madly surging and finally gathered into a sword light, and between the 2 worlds like opening the sky, each has a sky curtain like a gate opening making way for that sword light. There is a sword to travel far, be a guest xuanhuan. This is the first person in the world in the true sense. The sword light envelopes the infinite avenue and comes to the sea in the vast world. From the tomb in the sea, a huge image of an ascending ghost appeared, roaring endlessly. It stepped on the bottom of the sea with 1 foot, and grabbed the figure of a woman who was as small as a mustard seed with 1 hand. The appearance of the sword light made the entire awe-inspiring world bright as day, but the sword light was shining, fleeting, and the world returned to night. In fact, soaring from the sword to xuanhuan, many things are caused by the mind of Ning Yao's woman. For example, he has been deliberately downplaying the fact that he is a sword repairman in the Ascension realm. On his side, Ning Yao never talks much about the inside story of the colorful world, the first person in the new world. For example, in Xinjiang Mountain she attended the ceremony just like she did. In fact, she just dropped her sword casually, not to mention Yuan Xinye, the sovereign bamboo emperor, and the entire Xinjiang Mountains, thousands of miles of mountains and rivers would be gone. Ning Yao never robs him of the limelight as long as she is away from home and walking with him. For example, if he took the house to the house this time, she would always use the phrase sword Xiao Ning Yao, or Feishing City Ning Yao, otherwise she would simply just say the name. After all, Qin Pingan became a sword repairman, stumbled, bumpy and difficult. And she Ning Yao's life, practicing sword is too simple. As soon as she thought of this, she felt that she was not so annoyed and she began to return to Aquarius Island with Yu Jin, but the speed was not fast, lest someone wanted to go wrong. As for the ascending ghost that didn't know what to plan, it had been severely injured by her with a single sword, leaving traces, and then handed it over to the Confucian temple for disposal. On the streets of the capital, the young Zhao Duanming discovered that the swordsman in the green shirt, whose surname was Chen Dangshan, had been watching his nose and his heart, as if he was a coward who met a ghost at night. As for today's series of weird things, the old servant Dong from the neighborhood came here to find someone. The old coachman didn't deal with it when he met the man. As a result, the old coachman just said he wanted to practice, but he was inexplicably trained by others. Zhao Duanming is too lazy to think about the cause, but thinks that the thrilling kendo atmosphere is not a great sword immortal in the fairyland, and he can't make such a big move even if he is killed? Qin Pingan, who has been paying attention to imitating by Yujing, breathed a sigh of relief and was quite surprised. He did not understand why there was no sword to stop him. But since it is a good thing, there is no need to think about why for now, turning around and smiling and asked, "Your name is Zhao Duanming? Is it a child of the Zhao family in Tianshui County?" A young man who can be so acquainted with Zhuoshirlang from the Ministry of Rites, most likely, is still out of mind in Qishang and Cheer Street. Furthermore, the Tianshui Zhao family of Shangzhou Kingdom has a deep connection with the Dei border army. There is a family disciple who is practicing here so close to Renyuniyun Tower it makes sense. Zhao Duanming questioned, "Senior, are you?" Qin Pingan thought that the teenager had guessed his identity. After all, Dong, who previously called himself Qin Shanzhu. "I just thought of being blocked before, as if we can't overestimate the worldliness of the master and disciple janitor." Qin Pingan had to introduce himself. "I come from Luapa Mountain, and my surname is Qin." Zhao Duanming was stunned on the spot and murmured, "Isn't it possible?" Chao Jiugue said that the fallen mountain master Qin Shan is so handsome that every time he goes shopping, the little ladies in his hometown scream when they meet them. A woman fainted on the spot. Chao Jiugue, the bastard, has been soaking in the wine tank all day long. As expected, there is no sober word. Why is Qin Pingan in front of him so handsome? Also, beautiful appearance, clear spirit, and forget the mundane when you see it. Women in the world will lose their souls when they see it, so Qin Pingan helped the mountain to be named Luapashen? Your uncle's Chao Gingxin. I didn't recognize Qin Pingan's identity at a glance, so I will ask you to settle the account again, and I must drink to ruin you. Qin Pingan kept smiling and said, "If you have the opportunity, you must help me and thank Chao Duzhao for his kind words." The famous drunkard Chao Gingxin took the post of the head of the Longzhou Kiln administration. Therefore, Chao Gingxin has a very good relationship with the surnames of Huaihuang County, many Longzhou landscape gods, and various genealogical masters. Chao Gingxin is far more than Wu Yuan, the first county magistrate in the history of Lizhu Dongtian, to join the locals, so he is more regarded as a local. This Junyan Chao from the capital in those years seemed to have done nothing but just take a drink every day. Then it has nothing to do with Luapa Mountain. Just talking about Wei Bo and Zhu Lian, they all have a very good impression of this supervisor. For the new supervisor who later replaced Chao Gingxin, even if he was also a child of the capital, Wei Bo's evaluation is that he is too unwilling to do so. As an official, it is not worthy to buy a wine and a jug for Chao Duzhao. Qin Pingan turned around and reminded the old servant, Dong Shilang? Dong Hu sighed and asked tentatively, Qin Shanju really wants to do this? It is very embarrassing to let a big Empress Dowager come in person. Even if he was just helping Qin Pingan with a word, Dong Hu felt that holding his hands was hot and talking with his mouth. As soon as the old coachman had no records in his own ceremonial department's secret files, Dong Hu didn't know the realm and roots of the other party. He only knew that it was one of the royal worships of the Dei Song clan. Besides, there were some things just relying on the brute force on the mountain, destined to be unable to solve completely. Qin Pingan Point said at the head, Dong Shilang will report to the palace later, just tell her that it's her business whether he comes or not. Dong Hu glanced at the carriage, smiled bitterly. The coachman was gone and he could not drive. Guardian old Yuan Ing Lu Jia smiled and said, I'll do this little favor. Looking back at the evaluation of the landscape at the Yamen of the Ministry of Religion, Dong Lao Shilang remembered to add a few good words. Dong Hu smiled and said, Don't think about it. Duanming, you come to help Grandpa Dong drive the car. Zhao Duanming shook his head and said, Grandpa Dong, I want to watch the door and I can't get out of my body. Lu Pa put away the Bayou Dojo which was placed in the alley. He could not refuse Dong Hu and went to be a temporary groom. The old attendant had to say goodbye to Qin Pingan and drove back. It's just that Dong Hu finally said something outside officialdom. Qin Pingan, if you have something to discuss, you and I are both Dali people, and I know how hard it is that the seemingly peaceful situation in Aquarius Chao has come. Qin Pingan smiled and nodded, and after saying something he would not send Mr. Dong off. Then he moved his sleeves with his hands and leaned his back against the wall, turning his head to look at the western sky from time to time. Still a little worried about Ningyao. At the border between the sea and the land of Aquarius Island, the old man stopped his figure, and Aunt Feng showed up with a smile. The old coachman looked gloomy and hovered in the wind. After holding back for a long time he said, Now young people. But in the second half of the sentence, the old man still resisted not speaking. His really bad temper one by one. Aunt Feng raised her hand, gently twisted the colorful knot refined from the essence of 100 flowers under heaven, and smiled, Wait, that was not over yet. Look at the love of fighting together in the early years. Come on, I kindly advise. Don't even think about running to the ancestral court of the Chinese soldiers. Ning Yao's temperament has already been reminded. If you don't listen to it, then she will definitely come to the door without consequences. She is not Qin Pingan. Anyway, there is only one ruin left in her hometown. The old coachman glanced at his gloating colleague from the past and said depressed, You are the safest, no one can sin. Auntie Feng had a look of insincerity and surprise. The instability of wide-ranging good relationships. You who fan the flames are actually safe. Is there such a reason in the world? The old coachman glanced at the old Lizhu cave sky and whispered, The two who spoke later than us, where are they hiding now? It may be that Zhou Zi who knows the most inside stories in the world, the major event. As for the trivial matters, it should be the Fengjia aunt of the of wind. Aunt Feng shook her head. The old coachman was a little sad and sighed and said, In just 50 years what counts in the past is simply your blink of an eye. I never thought that it has been turned upside down. You said how hard it was for us at the beginning, so that today I am treated like this by two little guys who are less than 50 years old. Auntie Feng can't hear the boring words of her peers turning over the old almanac. Isn't it counted as lying on the book of merit and enjoying the good fortune? So she sneered, If you don't charge any money, he'll give you the truth that Qi Jingchun told me back then. If you get a bargain and sell well, you can think in your heart and say less. The old coachman sneered and said, What can I do with a few words? Auntie Feng raised her fingers, whirled them gently, a wisp of breeze followed, she smiled and said, I can't do anything about it. In the extreme distance, sword light like a rainbow rushed over, during which a cold voice rang, Junior Ning Yao, thank Aunt Feng. Over the Dali companion capital, a top floor resembling a Baiyujing, there was an uninvited guest from the Middle-earth divine continent. Before the sword light from the sky was about to fall, he began to play rascals. I saw an old scholar holding the arm of the borderless man with both hands. I can't do it. Every time a sword is here, is it really the sword light? No. It's all money. I have a good relationship with you in Aquarius, and there are only a few direct disciples who are together with you. Anyone who doesn't have a relationship with your Aquarius is worthy of credit. Take 10,000 steps back and say, don't treat money as money. I don't allow you to abuse the gods so badly. Money. The original guardian, who was invisible in his original form, was probably quite admiring the literary sage. He made an exception. He turned out to be an old master with a high crown and a beautiful appearance. The old master smiled and said, "You Confucian temple are good at reasoning. Why is it better to make up a reasonable reason?" The old scholar anxiously said, "In Jianghu the senior didn't meet my closed disciple at first sight. It can be considered a half-year-old friendship? This incense love, you are willing to say that you lose it? I don't think it can. Call seniors when you see people. Among Wensheng's lineages, it is indeed the essence of the closed disciple. What is a complacent disciple? This is a lot of truths. You don't need a husband to say that you have the true meaning, and then you can be regarded as a true complacent disciple. Download Mimi Reading Novel app for free reading forever. So how can old talents not be partial? You are still wronged by a hammer. Learn more from Junqian. The old master said, "I remembered it wrong," or when Sheng was confused. That kid didn't change the customs for Shijianhu. It was the Dali court and Zhenjingzong who did this. In the elders who are scholastic and recognized as the most able to chat, isn't it a curse to call Wenxing? Just call an old scholar, remove an old character, and change a small one to be kind. The old scholar always hugged the senior's arm and laughed and said, "Furthermore," senior said this with a guilty heart, "everything is difficult at the beginning. I don't believe that senior doesn't even understand this." The old master didn't talk with the old scholars about these things. The old scholars gave a soft sigh and fell into anger. He leaned back and grabbed his senior's arm. The old master said solemnly, "Reason." For the old scholars to make such a fuss, the sword light that appeared at the canopy of Aquarius Island has already fallen within the Dali capital. The old scholar of the Confucian temple by Yujing's Lu Qin, and his ability to beg by lie, can be called Shuangbi. The old scholar craned her neck to see. It was all right for the time being. Everyone was hitting. He immediately loosened his arms and one jumped back, shaking his sleeves vigorously and said, "Is Qin Pingon from Beipingzu?" The old master sneered, "Ning Yao who made the sword is a foreigner. According to the rules set by Cui Yang, a foreigner who dares to make a move without permission will only end up with one. Either smash the entire imitation by Yujing and leave by his own ability, or avoid the sword light and flee away. It is also capable of running away. Anyway, when he approaches Aquarius Island in the future, Dali treats him with courtesy time and time again." The old scholar confidently said, "Girl Ning is my Taoist companion to the closed disciple." The old master frowned and said, "Not yet." The old scholar bowed his head and bowed, "Hey, it's not a coincidence." Draw something out of his sleeve. It turned out to be a job offer. Don't read it, there are less than 100 words. The old scholars have attracted many sages of the literary temple. Everyone has worked together, carefully considered the words and carefully considered them. This is a literary appointment. Absolutely the only one in the world. The old Xiaotsai handed over the offer letter and murmured, "Neither of these two children have exchanged posts or exaggerated gifts. Qin Qingdu, an old bastard, has nothing to say, and Yao Chongdao can't wipe his face, so he has to wait for the old sword fairy to give the offer. What can I do?" Fortunately, I respected the old sword fairy back then. When I saw him on the other side of the city, it was not a grin that made my face sour. I had to go to Qin Pingan's wine shop and drink some wine. Only to get over. I knew that Qin Qing didn't talk about justice so much, so I went to Ningfu and talked to Yao's family by myself. The old scholar suddenly jumped his feet loudly and said, "Now it's fine, your own Ascension realm in Aquarius Island is going to be used for public or private purposes. It's all right. You take care of your ass." Glancing from the corner of her eyes, Ning Yata handed out 2 swords again, which was very pleasant. The old master returned the letter of appointment to the old talent who was begging for nothing. For this closed disciple, the old scholar really wanted to put an old face on the ground. Anyway, both sides have left Aquarius, the old master has nothing to do, and Ning Yao didn't bother to care about anything. The old master asked casually, "Isn't there a few words about you?" The old scholar was bored and said, "What do you mean by that? What kind of hammer is used? The student's wings are hard, so I won't let him take care of him." The old master laughed blankly. Some are fighting for the left and right sides of the self-proclaimed reading and practicing swordsmanship, saying that anyone can do this and that is right? Your husband, your conscience was eaten by a dog, right? The old xianxia whispered, no matter how unwilling, I can't stop the student-disciple from doing what should be done. The old master smiled and said, finally, I said something that a scholar should say. The young man stood on the corner of the street and took out a handful of salted and dried peanuts. While knocking, he secretly looked at the legendary xianxia. The jianghu road of the young sword fairy is like a thread connecting the Lizhu Dongtian and the Great Wall of Jiangxi. Qin Pingan turned his head and looked to the west of Aquarius Island. His realm was not enough. The battlefield was too far away from the sea to be seen. I chatted with the young man. According to Old Master Zu's interpretation, Zhao is a trend, a cause and a light. At the same time, it implies that the road is beautiful and fascinating. In the end there will be the beauty of the sun and the moon. Holding jade, bright mind, kind of virtue wins legacy. So your name is very good. The boy widened his eyes. My last name plus my first name make a bunch of them, so strong? Sword fairy must be responsible for speaking, right? We'll never catch a big kid, just do it indiscriminately, right? Zhao Duanming rubbed his mouth. Hearing Qin Pingan's chatter, the young man felt that he was already a certain upper 5-level monk by this name. Qin Pingan turned his head to wonder, your parents and Mr. Jiashu, don't you talk about this? Zhao Duanming was lamented, it's the master who said in the first school that I just missed it. As for why I missed it, alas, it's too much to look back on the past, so let's not mention it. When I was a child, I was often struck by lightning. Once, the child was happily carrying a book bag, bounced around on the way to the family school, clicked and fell to the ground. Once again, I went out to go shopping and watch the lantern market, and the third time was to climb high to appreciate the rain. In the end, no one wanted to stand beside him whenever it encountered those rainy weather. However, Zhao Duanming pondered that his own bad luck fortune was definitely not the last time. Qin Pingan stretched out his hand and spread out his palm. The boy naturally poured some salty dried peanuts to him. Zhao Duanming said, I stopped you from walking into the alley before. You are such a big sword fairy, don't you hold grudges? Seems to be missing a word. Qin Pingan bowed his head and kowtowed the salty dried peanuts, smiled and said, with your words I can't keep accounts. Zhao Duanming watched the man adeptly nibbling and spitting peanut shells. The young man grinned and said, Qin Shanzhu, I didn't expect you to be so approachable, you are not like a sword fairy anymore. Qin Pingan smiled and said, it's just Yupu realm, what a sword immortal. In my wife's hometown I can only count as a sword repairer. Calling the sword immortal is deliberately cursing others. Zhao Duanming remembers this inside story that ran out of the mouth of the young hermit. It turned out that the sword fairy of the Jade Pu realm of the Great Wall of Sword Qi was not taken seriously at all, it was really domineering. Turning around to show off with Chao Jiugui, the young man remembered something again and curiously said, where is the sister-in-law? Why didn't you come here with Brother Qin? Is it the sister-in-law who just made the sword? The temper is too good. Brother Qin is really blessed. I have to say something to my heart. I really didn't know the identity of Brother Qin before slapped a horse, but at first sight, I thought you two were a match made in heaven. In the words, Qin Pingan and the Taoist couple became the eldest brother and sister-in-law whom he had picked up for nothing. Qin Pingan, keep on going. This boy is quite good at talking, so talk more. As for Zhao Duanming's recognition of this relative, it doesn't matter. However, Qin Pingan quietly raised his eyelids, smiled and shook the peanuts in his hand, indicating that the other party can almost look at it. Don't worry about the teenagers here. Ichi Alley, in a mansion study room, a chief worshipper of Tianshui Zhao's exerting the supernatural powers of watching the mountains and rivers, and the old patriarch of the Zhao family in Tianshui sitting on the side, the two sides looked at each other from time to time, and were trembling from time to time. The fallen sword fairy in the sky. The old patron of Tianshui Zhao, who immediately removed his supernatural powers and kept his body tight and straightened, can finally comfortably lean back on the chair, caress his beard and laugh. He'll just say it, take it lightly. From a young age there is a root of wisdom which is the kind of my old Zhao family. The chief worshipper smiled and said nothing, just pull it down. After your grandson was struck by lightning for the first time when he was young, he was dizzy and talked all the time. Who was worried every day, whispering over there, my dear grandson's son, is it an idiot? The old man narrowed his smile. This calligrapher, known as the master of the style of the museum, stretched out a finger and wrote in the air. The words written Yuan Chao Yu. Anyway, they are all the surnames of Shangzhou country. Chen Pingon was taken by the teenager and walked into the alley with a bunch of keys in his hand. On the door of the small house, there is no Spring Festival couplet door god. Chen Pingon opened and closed the door and put away the keys. In fact, this visit to the capital of Dei is not just the grievance between Chen Pingon and the Queen Mother Dei, but a new question left by the senior brother Cui Yun to the student and the Dei court. The senior brother Cui Yang set up a questioning situation for others, how the people who entered the game were torturing people. Anyway, Chen Pingon had already personally learned in jianghu. Everything is right and everything is wrong. It's only between the thought of the Emperor Song He. Chen Pingon strolled around the house and walked leisurely. He opened the door of the two-story library and stepped into it. He found that besides books, there were books on the four-walled bookshelves. There was a ladder on the four walls. In addition, it was very clean. Any extra decorations? If you want to go to the second floor, even without stairs, it seems you have to borrow the ladder used to find books. Chen Pingon was not in a hurry to find a book, but just sat on the threshold, took out the sword gourd and drank alone. 3,000 years ago, in the battle involving the water transport of the world, the dragon slayers, later Jia Xing, Bai Mang and Qin Zhuoyo, were all the same people who were known as brothers and brothers to Qin Ling. They chased and killed the last true dragon in the world. Wang Zhu and Ni Ping Lane and Zhu, the maidservant beside Song Jisin and Ni Ping Lane. Wang Zhu disembarked at the southern end of Aquarius Island, passed through Old Longqing, and then continued to escape north, arching out of the underground walkway that was later used as the Xinjia ferry route, and finally ended at the boundary of Old Longzhou, creating a Lizhu cave, one of the 36 small caves. Wang Zhu rushed to Old Man Yang to seek refuge in the avenue. He hoped that the person in charge of the ancient ascending platform would be able to help her, but Old Man Yang chose to ignore it. For some reason, the preaching teacher in the center of Beta Shengzheng did not personally kill the inevitable real dragon. What he wanted was the result of no real dragon in the world. As for the Qi practitioners who participated in the final battle of slashing the dragon, many died and fell. There were also a group of Qi practitioners who cultivated on the spot, approached the water platform, contaminated the dragon energy, and absorbed the extremely abundant aura of heaven and earth. The most important thing is, it was the great aura that the real dragon shed after the incident. Many of the surnames of Gaomen in the small town began to multiply at that time, which led to the creation of the people of the small town of Lizhu Cave. Further on, there is a family of Sanjiao, and the four saints of Confucianism, Buddhism and Taoism joined hands to erect the archway that local people laughed as crabfang. As for why the person who cut the dragon swears to cut the dragon, Confucianism and the Confucian temple do not seem to hinder much. How did this person collect Zheng Zhuzhong, Han Xiaosa, and Lu Qiqing as his disciples in the early years? Except for the eldest disciple Zheng Zhuzhong, the rest received the biography. Regardless, it's an old calendar that can't be read. In addition, it seemed that before Lu Qin soared to the Qingming world, he had some unclear avenue relationship with a dragon girl, so later he had an admiration for Chen Lingjun. Even in Luapa Mountain, Lu Qin asked Chen Lingjun to choose don't follow him to practice in Baiyujing. Even if Chen Ling didn't agree, Lu Qin didn't do anything extra and didn't procrastinate. Just saying this is unreasonable. Lu Qin would never treat him Chen Pingon in such a straightforward manner, such as what about Shiro? Lu Xuanhuan was in Baiyujing, didn't he just stare at the trivial skin of Qilong Alley outside the door through those eyes of Shiro? Until Cui Dongshan interrupted this lotus, the third head teacher of Baiyujing didn't give up. In fact, the monks who raised the dragons back then suffered heavy casualties in order to stop the dragon slayers. Therefore, Qin Pingon guessed that it is very likely that there is a certain ancestor of a dragon breeder hidden in the Lizhu cave, who is a great helper of dragons, and the rise of the Song court of Dali. Maybe this person has contributed a lot. And the next one. The newly built bridge with a plaque hanging on the Feng Xing Shui Qi, may be the man's suggestion behind the scenes. Chen Pingan's thoughts were light, sitting on the threshold and drinking wine, his back turned to the study building, and he looked at the small courtyard. The world is like flying dust, surveying people's hearts in the chaotic realm. The sun and the moon are like shock pills, breaking their shackles in the clouds and shadows. Took a sip of wine, the fragments of the natal porcelain were left, and they have been incompletely pieced together. To be precise, it was Qin Pingon who had to bear it again and again, and never rushed to pick up the thread. There is no problem with Chen Pingon as an immortal or even ascendant. Possibly the only problem is that the hidden danger lies on the road pass that is the bottleneck of the ascension realm. If it cannot be broken, it depends on the integrity of the natal porcelain in the past. Of course, the premise is that Chen Pingon can get there, and he has to become a sword repairman who is the bottleneck of the Ascension realm. Qin Pingan is quite sure that he will enter the fairyland in the future, but it is difficult for Jianxiu to enter the Ascension city. Of course, it is not difficult that it is strange. Except my wife. Qin Pingan smiled triumphantly. Then I felt a little more relaxed. The shopkeeper of the inn, not a practitioner, said that he had a large piece from a dragon kiln in Liju cave and painted a vase with a figure. Hometown is called Beipingzu. The inn and Renyuniyun building can be considered close at hand. The shopkeeper of the inn is very likely to meet his senior brother Cui Yang often in his early years. Could the vase be one of several pieces of broken porcelain? Regardless of the truth about the vase, the Queen Mother of Daily is so confident. Do you already know the problem of Qin Pingan's 14 realms of harmony? Destined to not get around every piece of broken porcelain scattered on all sides? So she has to wait for the price. She feels that she is just a lost mountain lord in the Yupu realm. Even with the 2 titles of Hermit and Junior brother, she is still not qualified to sit down with her and talk about the price? Qin Pingan puts away her hip flask and curls her lips. This lady is quite good at taking it. She thinks very beautifully. Stand up, interlace your hands and 10 fingers, stretch your muscles and bones and walk back and forth in the corridor outside the door. Wufu 10 realms, 1 level of vigor, is the key winner of Qin Pingan and Chao Xuanhuan. After losing, I never expected to win against Chao Xi in my life. Only when I win I have a few chances. Qin Pingan has an excellent memory. He has seen the rivers and mountains of people and things, and once seen it, it is like an extra white drawing scroll. Then every time Qin Pingan listens to one more sentence, looks at this world more often, just like adding a touch of color. Pure Takeo, a breath of real breath. The world is spectacular, swallowing mountains and rivers. In fact, before reaching the end, Qin Pingan didn't know the matter. Probably, as Cui Dongshan said, he did it unintentionally but most intentionally. Since Qin Pingan learned boxing, Mr. Qi, Aliang, Cui Dongshan, Cui Qing, Guyu, Li Er, the old swordsman, and the grandmother Bai. Everyone seems to be deliberately concealing this matter. Compared with today's Yidali Jingshi on the Changpu River, the grievances of young officials, the old master's words of poverty and shame, the 2 fairies' relief, the pride of being a Dali in the eyes of the god of Changpu River. They are just like with this standing in Qin Pingan's heart picture scroll. All the personal affairs that move Qin Pingan's heart, all the joys and sorrows, are like Qin Ping seeing it, thinking about it. It will start to draw pens and paint for the picture of mind Dai. Like the whole world, it is a dojo where Qin Pingan is alone. Why did Chao Xi go to the Great Wall of Jianxi when he was young, build a hut and practice boxing there? Later he even liked to travel several continents alone, so he met Yu Yaofu at the ancient battlefield site of Jinjiazu. In fact, Chao Xi is also making the pavement for the magnificent mountains and rivers, early on. Maybe Chao Tsigui is attributable to the fact that he doesn't like to be nosy, and what he sees is more of mountains and rivers than people. This makes Chao Xi's painting degree of mood scroll still not enough, especially not heavy enough. Of course, it doesn't mean that I have seen mountains and rivers for a few times, or that my own heart is full of spirit. Otherwise it's too simple. 9 realms martial arts only need to travel far away from the wind and look at the mountains and rivers of Jojo with wide eyes. It is with every sincere approval or denial that the brush can be used to paint, and the white-drawn scroll can be emphasized. Qin Pingan put away his thoughts, turned and walked into the book building, set up the ladder, and climbed up to the 2nd floor step by step. Qin Pingan stopped and stood on the book ladder, his shoulders almost flush with the floor of the 2nd floor. There is no one, nothing. Like the former master of a book building, he is studying alone in this world, and when he leaves he will return all the books to the world. In imitating by Yujing, the old scholar suddenly asked, "Senior, are we talking?" The old master raised an eyebrow. Oh? Know what little abacus this Wenxing plays. Once the 2 sides started to ask questions formally, there would be no time to take care of the movement in Dali capital. Even if Ningyao returned to Dei and chopped down a capital city, he would not care about by Yujing's side. The old scholar timidly said, "Senior, you are a well-deserved saint of heaven and earth. The Confucian temple is willing to give the title, and the senior doesn't want it. But I'm the sage of the academy. Just talk to a martial arts master in the world. So what do you need to do, let me lose half first?" The old master smiled. "Then give it up?" asked both sides. Of course it is not a dispute of spirit. In fact he had long wanted to ask this Wenxing. The poor old talent in front of him is, after all, recognized as the most quarrelsome person in the world. The old scholar's eyes sparkled. It seems to be saying, a continent, mountains and rivers who dare to turn the sky have all got up. I have all the descendants of Wensheng's line, which one is lazy. So if you lose the question today, just talk about this place and don't care about what Qin Pingan does in the future. The old master thought for a while but hesitated. A question is not a trivial matter. Will lead to great weather. The old scholar shook his sleeves lightly and smiled. Since the master can talk best, then the scholar will come to talk about the earth and talk about the world and the world together. The words of the saints with the heavenly constitution. A majestic world, surging with wind, especially the Aquarius Island, falling in the eyes of the Qintian supervisors of various countries, it is countless golden light shining on the world. On the side of Gongdalan of the Confucian Temple, Li Sheng and Jing Xingxi are sitting opposite each other. The two sides are playing. Li Sheng glanced at Aquarius Island and said helplessly, "Whether you go anywhere." As for the tomb in the sea that One Hai carefully set up, and the ascending ghost after Ning Yao's sword was taken, the Confucian Temple already had a countermeasure. Sheng Ping smiled and said, "Now that there are no knots and worries, when Sheng is finally about to discuss the Tao." The veteran talents who were moved out of the Confucian Temple, especially after the disciples were dispersed, actually never took up the identity of a literary sage. But in Ao Pingzhou tonight, in Baiyujing, the old scholar took the lead to sit on the ground, straightened his clothes, stretched out a palm, looked serious and said indifferently, "Please sit down. Talk about it, please take a seat. Of course you will lose." Sword of Coming Chapter 832. Qin Pingan got off the ladder and picked out a book on the shelf, which was a collection of clear words devoted to life. Turning the book quickly, there are many sages' doctrines in the book, and Qin Pingan is deeply impressed by it. What is lazy to look back on? What is the storm? It is the hero's heel standing. Qin Pingan always felt that he was talking to himself, and he was very courageous, and it was more useful than drinking. Besides, Qin Pingan figured out a truth for himself early on. Don't be angry, don't talk irony, especially don't stop speaking with those close to you. Putting the book in his hand back to the shelf, there was no reason to think of the Taoist from Tonggishao Huanghuaguan in Longzhou. Qin Pingan smiled, following the example, gently pushing the surrounding books with the palm of his hand. The position was flush, not bad at all. Qin Pingan strode out of the study building, opened the courtyard door, and after thinking about it, Qin Pingan didn't lock the door. In case he had to come back, there were many things in vain. After all, it was the brother's house, flying around, which was not appropriate. As for Emperor Song Dynasty and the Queen Mother, it doesn't matter whether they come or not. They come, it's good for both parties. If they don't, Qin Pingan doesn't matter at all because they have already planned to read a few more days in the capital. Now that I have guessed the intention of the senior brother Cui Yang, it is very simple. It is rare that there is such a good thing that does not need to be divided between public and private. Moreover, Qin Pingan suddenly remembered something. If Song He is a student of senior brother Cui, he is the little uncle of Emperor Dali, so it's only natural to protect his nephew. But if you don't have enough Song and Dao heart, then change someone with enough Dao heart to become the emperor. Anyway, once the old bottom is revealed and the old account of the Song clan family mansion is opened by someone with a heart, the emperor originally belonged to the established fact of inheriting Datong. Will become shaky and a continent is in an uproar. And the national teacher Cui Yang's assessment of Song Jisin was probably the Aquarius War. The performance of the King Song Mu from the old dragon city to the central Dadu did not disappoint. It is obvious to all. The imitation of Baiyujing staying near the Dali companion capital and Dadu temple must be a kind of goodwill reminder from the gentleman to the students that even if the husband is gone, there will be no national teacher in Dali for the time being. A monarch Xiu Kiziping still can't forget. Qin Pingan even felt that the Dali court, back then, offered to return to the mountains and rivers after the war according to the military merits. Once they did not act in this way, the people of Aquarius became distracted, and it was difficult for all the vassal states in the south to consolidate their combat power. Once the war ended, if there was still a pattern of one continent and one country, once the Dali capital and the Vas formed a separation of north and south confrontation, the front stretch is so long, it is easy to beat it for decades or even more than 100 years, and then the entire Aquarius island will be destroyed. As for Song Jisin, does he have the intention to restore his real name? At that time, Qin Pingan was aware of Song Jisin's ambition in the Jidu temple, but Song Jisin was too jealous of the country's teacher Cui Yang, and he could not bear it all these years and always abide by his official duties. Otherwise, Song Jisin, the king of the Dali clan, had an unusually good relationship with almost all the mountain forces in Aquarius, especially with the Dali frontier army. As for the rulers of the country, the 6 yamen that accompanied the capital of Dali, and the pillars of civil and military affairs in it, had all faced war directly. Which one is not proficient in the knowledge of utility, not only apt to learn, but also extremely pragmatic. And compared to the officials in the capital, the southern officialdom is mostly young and strong civilians and generals. Moreover, like Lu Gaohua in the Rouge County of the Tsai country, why would he rather give up his hometown and a country where he has a bad book? The middle-level officials, and this subtle identification itself is the identification of the feudal king Song Mu by the various vassal states of Dali in the past. Therefore, the emperor did not dare to act rashly on the entrenched and deep-rooted accompany capital in Dei capital, while the mansion did not know the arrangement of Cui Huang's successor, so he had been in peace. If Qin Pinggan's bottom line before coming to Dali capital was to retrieve the broken piece of porcelain from the hand of the Queen Mother of Dali, even if he was torn apart with the entire Dali court, he would do a fight first, and then move to Luapa Mountain. Numerous vassals went to a place in the southern part of Baijiluzu, took root, and finally echoed with the Lupa xianxia sect established in Tonggishao. The two sides echoed each other. In the middle was a Big Li, anyway it was completely with the Big Li Song family. So now, Qin Pinggan is not so easy to talk about just taking back the tiles. For example, renunciation. The southern fan went north and became emperor in Beijing. After all, it still depends on the choice of the emperor. Only a few dozen steps out of the alley, Qin Pinggan began to carefully consider the 3 main lines of temples, frontiers and mountains here, and then involved a rough calculation of at least a dozen links, such as the old man in the clan's mansion and all the upper pillars. The surname, the major hunters, and the continued development of each link. In the final analysis, it is still the pursuit of peace in a country and world. It's just that Qin Pinggan didn't realize that what he thought and what he was doing was actually like a great master of the country. In the past 100 years or so, Cui Yang, embroidering the tiger, walked slowly in the alley in this way, alone, thinking about it every time he went to the court to discuss matters or retreat. Near the alleyway, Qin Pinggan found that the young man was squatting in the alleyway and drinking secretly while the master was away. He glanced at the street from time to time to see if there was a master. Hearing the footsteps in the alley, Zhao Duanming immediately got up, put the pot of wine behind him and asked with all his face, "Big brother Qin is going to find his sister-in-law, do you want me to help lead the way? I'm familiar with this place in Beijing but closed. Just walk with your eyes open." That is to say, the relationship between the two parties is temporarily unfamiliar. Otherwise, I have in the vicinity of this place no matter where the bird does not shit, Zhao Duanming can pat his chest and say that he has a clear conscience. Qin Pinggan stopped and asked, "Duanming, do you have a girl you like?" Zhao Duanming is extremely satisfied with his name now. It's just that Qin Jianxian is an untimely question which makes him feel uncomfortable. What girl is talking about most of the night when I am drinking flower wine? The boy sighed, "Sorry? I'm not too young anymore. There are some girls I like and there are a lot of girls who like me. It's a pity that I practice spiritual practice every day. I am a master of his practice. I haven't bitten my mouth with the girl. Chao Jiugui hasn't laughed at me less about this. He's a 40-year-old man, and an old bachelor who doesn't even have a quilt at night, so I'm so embarrassed to say me too. I don't know who gave him the face. I didn't wake up after drinking. I don't know him." Then the boy found that the sword fairy in Qingshan also sighed. There are 100 sorrows never fail. Zhao Duanming immediately handed over a handful of salted dried peanuts. Qin Pinggan also gave the juvenile a jug of wine. The juvenile put away his jug. He couldn't get good wine from Chao Jiugui. He was a pauper who could only pay on credit everywhere. After opening the mud seal, he raised his head and took a sip and asked, "Big brother Qin, where is the drink?" Qin Pinggan smiled and said, "I opened a small wine shop with others and sold this Qingshan wine." The boy suddenly said, "Let me just say it, I know the way when I drink this drink. Not just after the entrance I tasted a few small summer coins. Can the drink on the top of the mountain have this taste? Brother Qin, if we are with whom, then we will say nothing, you will give me 2 more pots of wine, and I will return to send master and Chao Jiugui." Speaking of this, the young man said solemnly, "Brother Qin, don't worry, I'm a well-known scheming man since I was a kid. Today we are called brothers and brothers. I promise that I will not talk about anyone except that Chao drunkard even if I go home. Don't tell me. Brother Qin, you just came to the capital, don't you know that over there it's my home in Cheer Street a few years earlier and I fight every time with one hand. Later, I didn't know which shameless old in Cheer Street revealed my identity as a monk, so I took the initiative to give the top spot to someone else. Otherwise, the gang of shrimp soldiers and crabs on Cheer Street would have to be suppressed by us. For several years, in accordance with the old rules, every day I obediently behave with my tail, and I have to deter when we meet. Chin Pingon twisted his fingers and threw a peanut into his mouth. He smiled and shook his head and said, "Knowing is going to knowing, you can't give away 2 pots of wine." Zhao Duanming asked tentatively, "Brother Chin, can I calculate my debts?" Chin Pingon shook his head and said, "Small business, no credit. Don't worry, go to the inn just a few steps away. It's early and Ning Yao hasn't returned yet." He stayed there alone, showing that he was ill-intentioned. It was clear that he was eager to eat hot tofu. Well, it seems too careless. By the way, Brother Chin, how old are you this year? It's really not surprising that your sister-in-law is looking for you to be a Taoist companion to a young, promising and handsome sword fairy like you. You're not old. What level are you now? I haven't reached the Yupu realm yet. Okay. Brother Chin, a beautiful woman like his sister-in-law with a high level of realm, you have to relax a little bit. There must be so many men who like her in secret, and there are too many to count. Duanming, you are still too young to understand some things. A woman like my daughter-in-law, ordinary men don't dare to like it. Even if they admire, they only dare to hide in their hearts. Well, there is one who is not afraid of death. And then I was knocked out and hung up on the tree. Who? Daring is so fat that you are too fat. Brother Chin, give your name and the younger brother will help you clean up when you turn around. Coincidentally, he is now an official in Beijing. Who? The official is not big. Do you care about Xiang and Cheer Street mess? His name is Zhao Yu and the official is not too big. He is the attendant of the criminal department in the capital, as if the house is in Yurichi Lane. I'm scared? It's said that the horse dung Zhao family is the most miserable. Is it the swearing of Dali officialdom? Obviously not. It is right to praise, but I see you hang. Brother Chin, you're just a joke, just a servant of the criminal ministry. I invite him, please come. Yeah, sure Lang Zhao, it's such a coincidence passing by. The young man turned his head quickly. There was a fart, Zhao Shirlang, and no ghost. The young man laughed and said, "He is good when he is here. The official is a big one, but such a weak scholar has no power to restrain him. I don't have to use any magical magic, I just need to punch and kick again, let him hit wherever he goes and go back wherever he goes horizontally." Chin Pingon patted the boy on the shoulder, holding back his laugh. "Stop, Zhao Shirlang is really here. If you continue, he will listen to him. This guy is small-minded and likes to hold grudges." The young man nodded vigorously and said, "A big man, it is really bad to hold grudges and it is not generous." Chin Pingon echoed, "Mostly it is not enough to cultivate the heart." Ning Yao quietly returned to the inn, deliberately hiding her figure, still lying on the table lazily at the moment. By the way, listening to the small alley chatting, she smiled a little. Poor boy, I don't know which ditch he abducted. Chin Pingon walked out of the alley and stopped, waiting for the nephew to approach. Now it seems that I have a lot of nephews, the emperor in the palace, the servant of the criminal ministry in front of him, and Wu Yuan, who served as the first magistrate of Huaihuang County in the past. On the other side of the street, several priests of the Ministry of Work of the Dali Imperial Court were leading people to repair the street over there. They saw the sword immortal in Qingshan, speechless, and turned a blind eye. If it were a normal mountain dynasty, it would definitely stay overnight. Dali capital city is one of the luckiest places, because an embroidered tiger came. In just 100 years, a frontier army cavalry was built for the Dai dynasty, which can survive on the dead, survive in the dead, and win at the disadvantage. Occasionally there are defeats and all the generals die. Zhao Duanming probed his head around the corner. This Zhao Shirlang had only looked at him from a distance before. He was really impatient. To put it conscientiously, in terms of fighting skills, it is estimated that 100 Zhao Shirlang could not beat a Qin Jianxian. When it comes to looks, neither of the 2 Qin elder brothers can beat each other. Zhao Yu first greeted a familiar Dali Ministry of Industry official, then squatted next to the well, and took a few glances. Only then did he walk towards the alley, salute Chin Pingon and smiled, "See you Lord Qin Shan." Chin Pingon smiled and shook his head and said, "I'm all from the same town. If you are polite, just call Master Uncle." The young man who kept his ears up listening, Brother Chin, was a bit chewy when talking to outsiders. Zhao Yu asked, "Miss Ning hasn't come back yet?" Chin Pingon craned his neck and looked at both sides of the street. A little farther, there are big trees and high branches. Zhao Yu smiled and said, "A gentle lady and gentleman are so charming, Zhao yes love for Miss Ning, the sky is blue and white, there is nothing that I dare not admit and there is nothing that I dare not see people. Qin Shanju should not do this on purpose." Chen Pingan smiled, using the dialect of Liju Dongshan's hometown. He said something to Zhao Yu that he couldn't understand even if he was killed by a young man. If it were replaced with a homonym in Dali Mandarin, it would be strictly write a new setting. What the is this? Zhao Duanming was confused. Ning Yao couldn't help but couldn't help. She knew what Chen Pingan was talking about because she would later record all the small-town dialects that she had heard back then in homophony. I still play with waves, be careful. This is a mantra for the elders in the family to scold the stubborn younger ones in their hometown. Naxing also eats. You troubles? Come to see you for something. What's up? The young Zhao Duanming heard it like clouds and mists, but Ning Yao over the inn had already sat up, resting his cheek with one hand, listening with gusto. She understood everything. Zhao Yu suddenly said in Dali Mandarin, I just got a piece of news that Shizu arrived at the imitating by Yujing and started to talk with others. Chen Pingan nodded and said, I must have known it earlier than you. Is quarreling interesting? Fortunately, it's all wins anyway, so for my husband it really tastes mediocre. Most interestingly, why is it a quarrel? What is a sage? Use learning to strengthen people's hearts and use Taoism to repair the world. The place where one person lives together, Beipingzu, Tonggishao and Fuyezhou. 3 continents, mountains, rivers and land, vegetation grows, flowers bloom particularly beautiful, dead trees are in spring, water transport condenses, mountain roots are closed, summer is scorching and rain falls from the sky in arid areas. Chen Pingyan, who is still invisible, overwhelmed by the awe-inspiring world, would certainly perceive this vision of heaven and earth earlier than Zhao Yu. Zhao Yu endured for a long time and said, Chen Pingyan, what are you comparing to me? Chen Pingan said, you are upset. Zhao Yu laughed angrily, Miss Ning doesn't like me again, you're unhappy. Chen Pingan said, there is a nephew who talks to Uncle Master like this in the world? Zhao Yu took a deep breath and said, it's okay, I'm here to meet you, a hard-working little uncle. Chen Pingan suddenly said, in fact there is no need to be your official. Don't mix up many things, at least temporarily. This sentence is true. After all, Chen Pingan still hopes that his peers who go out in his hometown and small town will be better off outside, so as not to be too downcast. Zhao Yu waved his hand, turned and left. Chen Pingan said, Zhao Yu, to be a digression, what is your relationship with the Ministry of Rites? If the relationship is okay, can you do something more unpleasant, such as asking the monks on the mountain to use the magic of the fairy family to gather one record the various local dialects of Zhaoshan? Because the book can be reprinted, but once the dialect is gone, it is really gone. And this matter may involve a little bit of a country's cultural affairs, not completely in vain, you have no idea? Zhao Yu turned his head and smiled and said, the court has already started to do it. The editor-in-chief, it is me. It is a part-time job and can receive 2 salaries. Gee, you thought you could get a game back? Are you young? The fledgling young man really does not know the depth of the rivers and lakes. Chen Pingan was relieved and nodded, I'm a good man. Zhao Yu left without looking back. When the Minister of Criminal Justice was gone, the young man walked out of the alley swaggeringly, gave Chen Pingan a thumbs up and smiled, Brother Chen chats with people very strong. Chen Pingan smiled and said, don't learn this, it's meaningless, and cultivate your way in the future. The boy suddenly asked with a serious face, Chen Jianxian, do you think I can be among the 5 realms in the future? Chen Pingan smiled and asked, why do you ask this suddenly? Zhao Duanming looked sad and whispered, Master said that the reason why I practiced so quickly was because I was eating food. Don't look at my age, I am a monk in the Dragon Gate realm. But if there is no accident in this life, it's just a golden pill if you're dead. Chen Pingyan was silent for a moment with a soft expression. He looked at this young man in the capital who was not stealing and drinking. He just thought that Chen Ping's next words made the young man even more disappointed because a sword fairy said, at least now, I think it's really difficult for you to be among the Jade Princesses. Jindan and Yuanying are all high thresholds and barriers that are more difficult to cross than ordinary Qi practitioners. It's like you are paying off debts because your practice was so smooth before. How old is it, 14 or 15? It's the Dragon Gate realm. So your master didn't lie to you before. The young man was silent. Then Chen Pingan smiled and asked, Zhao Duanming, do you think meeting me tonight is a minor accident? Zhao Duanming nodded. That must be the hidden official of the Great Wall of Sword Qi Chen Shanzhu who can make Chao Jugui talk a little more, especially the man of Ning Yao, a guy who can make Dallas prestige, Zhao Yu eat everywhere. Before today the boy had never dreamed that he could meet Chen Pingan, and he could chat for so long and drink peanuts together. Chen Pingan asked again, isn't this just an accident? Zhao Duanming's eyes lit up, that's right. Qin Pingan smiled and said, a person who is a master in the world must of course be a preacher like your master. Then no one does not think of his own direct succession and can be better than Blue. Zhao Duanming, practice well. Don't stare at the upper 5 realms that are far away in the sky. Otherwise, the more you think about it, the worse you will be. You will remind yourself from time to time, such as Master, wait patiently. One day the apprentice will definitely give you an unexpected. Zhao Duanming, do you have this intention? The young man's eyes were bright and clear, his face was firm, and he nodded and said, you can have it. It's just an idea, it's not difficult. Qin Pingan patted the boy on the shoulder and smiled and said, tell you something again. When I was your age, the Chongqing Bridge was broken and I had to practice punching every day to hang my life. I was a martial artist. Look at today. Me, is it another accident? Zhao Duanming believed and doubted, aren't you blindfolded? Qin Pingan smiled and didn't say much. He moved to the inn and said, you asked me for 2 bottles of wine but I didn't give it. I will wait for you to be among Yuanying and Yupu. I will invite you to drink. The boy looked at the back of the green shirt and asked loudly, Qin Pingan, what do you say? The swordsman in the green shirt did not turn around, but raised his hand and gently clenched his fist. I am a swordsman of my generation, wine is the least deceiving jianghu. Inside the inn, Ning Yao lowered his head, resting his chin on his arm, his eyelashes trembling slightly. Inside Miyagi. Dong Hu, the servant of the Ministry of Rites, did not miss a single word, and reported the conversation over the alley with His Majesty and Empress Dowager. The woman had opened the window before and she had been standing by the window. His Majesty the Emperor smiled and nodded, but the Queen Mother did not speak. Dong Hu knew he had nothing to do tonight. Just walking to the door of the house, Dong Hu suddenly stopped, turned around to talk to the Emperor first, and the old attendant stood up and said, Your Majesty, the junior officer had been in Yuanshou for 6 years and had a serious illness. At that time he had to resign. I dare to ask Cui Guosher for a copy of Qi Ziping's copybook. Song He smiled and said, I naturally know this. Apart from you, the national teacher has never given a copybook to anyone, so at the time, this was a beautiful conversation between the ruling and the opposition, and I was equally envious. Later, officials from the Lily Ministry went to Lizhu Cave to help the imperial court and the archway building to build the monument. It was Dong Hu. The woman turned her head and said with a sneer, Dong Shilang, alluding to something? Let's hear. The officialdom of Dali has always abided by the rules set by the National Division, literary and martial and literary, only said that both sides can hear if you understand. Dong Hu, the soft guy in the officialdom that even Yuanying monk Lu Jia knows, for some reason facing the question of the Queen Dowager tonight, the old attendant turned his back a little bit straight. Since the Queen Dowager has asked questions, then he can speak well. To be more blunt, the 4 things of Xiuqi and Pingping naturally cannot be in a disorderly order, and the importance and the size of the issues are obvious. The woman was about to speak, and Emperor Song He had a gentle expression. Dong Shilang, you should go back to the mansion for a rest. You will have work tonight. Dong Hu and His Majesty the Emperor left the house silently. Song He said softly, Mother, don't be angry. Dong Shilang just said what a courtesy servant should say. The woman nodded and left the window. She slowly sat back in her position and said with a smile, It is not guilty to have such idleness with Dong Hu. The person is nice, all-sided and exquisite, and the officials are not bad. There is credit. Song He breathed a sigh of relief. With that said, I'm afraid that Dong Hu's future posthumous post will be a little bit twisted. That's how the mother's queen does things. It's always hard to find any major faults, which is understandable, but occasionally it makes people feel that something is missing. Song He picked up an orange and said, Mr. Wenxing arrived at Baiyujing and talked with that person. The Sanzhou Mountains and rivers including Huai's Aquarius, which means that the Confucian Temple will definitely look at Dali by the way. The woman smiled and said, What are you nervous about? Isn't this a good thing? First, Ning Yao didn't abide by the rules of Dali, and in the capital of the capital, he used a sword to cut people indiscriminately. The hermit is young and vigorous. During the discussions in the Confucian Temple, he can rely on his merit and cultural identity to fight against his words and deeds one after another. The reputation of being arrogant and domineering on the Middle-earth god continent is faster than the sky. It's big, but when Sheng, a Confucian temple who accompanies the 4th god, should always be reasonable? Song He said, It is extremely difficult for Qin Pingan to have today's achievements. Although he has never veiled his face, I am willing to respect this person. The woman smiled and nodded, Yes, this is your emperor's aura. It would be inappropriate if you have a small belly and chicken intestines. Anyway, you just don't have to be afraid of him. He was speechless for a while, put the orange petal into his mouth and chewed lightly, slightly astringent. After the old attendant left the imperial city, he still took the carriage that had only been changed from the coachman and went back home. Lu Jia smiled and asked, "Master Dong, are you in a bad mood? Is something serious?" Dong who didn't fight and he almost yelled at him. "You know what a fart, smile like an egg. If one is not careful, our Dali court will change the sky." The young hermit and Na Ning Yao deliberately wore 2 peace cards issued by the Ministry of Justice and walked into the capital. A fool understands what it means. It's just that the old attendant quickly resisted, and told an old antique who only knew how to practice, that the yumbwa in the court was weird. Lu Jia was silent all the way, but when he was about to reach Ichi Lane he suddenly said, "Dong Hu, you have such no confidence in Master Guosher?" Dong Hu was stunned, frowning. The old monk Yuan Ying, who drove steadily, looked up and glanced into the distance. Many lights in the capital were shining like the day, and the shining made the sky above the capital buildings like a foggy yellow tulle, like that lampshade. Lu Jia smiled to himself and said, "I don't know anything about official affairs and politics. I only know one thing except for practice. Even if Cui Guo is no longer here, I will still care about the people of this country and Dali, Iron Cavaliers and countless people of you and me. Others may not be able to do this behind the scenes, but Cui Guosher will definitely do." Dong Hu's brows stretched, and before he reached the door of his house, he asked to stop, got out of the carriage, thanked the old Yuanying and walked slowly home. Lu Jia asked, "What about the carriage?" Dong Hu turned his head and smiled, "Guan lousy shit." Lu Jia smiled and said, "Master Dong walks carefully at night. He is a lot of age and is easily dazzled. I know many doctors who sell traditional Chinese medicine." Dong Hu choked for a while, so he had to say dully, "Stop the carriage to the gate of the imperial city and it's all right." Walking on the extremely wide road of Ichi Lane, the old attendant sighed and nodded sometimes. Back in those days, Lao Zi also entered the Imperial Academy with the old fellow of the Shuizhao family in the same year, known as reading and drinking, reciting poems and writing pens, 2 young boys full of spirits, and one of the best, Dong Zhi's articles, magnificent and brilliant, Zhao Zhi's calligraphy, wielding a spear. That year, in the Dali Imperial examination, Dong Hu and this friend of the same year, one was the second place and the other was the flower hunting. Of course, the latter was still half a round older than himself, and still not as good as his own teenage prodigy. Mr. Guan, it happened to be the teacher who Dong Hu and the others tried. When Dong Hu first entered the officialdom he was always sharp and sharp. As a result, he sat on the bench in the Imperial Academy for nearly 10 years, and he had a clear title. Since he was hopeless in his official career, he simply broke the pot. He was the best in cursing. If someone retaliated, Dong Hu would scold more vigorously, and he would scold civilian officials instead of military generals. In fact, Dong Hu was only 30 years old at that time. As a result, he cared about Qixiang and Cheer Street and won the nicknames of Dong Vixen and Dong Curse Street respectively. Dong Hu stopped, and as soon as Mr. Guan left, there were no bricks on the corner of the wall. Back then I was drunk. I walked here, reached out to support the wall, and vomited so much that I felt my heart, stomach were all on the ground. As a result, he got kicked and Dong Hu turned around in a curse. When he looked at him drunkenly and dimly, he found that it was the old man Guan, who was so scared that he woke up. Old man Guan smiled and asked, "Hey, who am I talking about, so courageous, dare to run wild dogs in my place?" It turned out that it was Dong Xiu who wrote Master Dong. Dong Hu is a scholar who respects his teacher and respects his teachings. No matter how scared he is, he must be afraid that this teacher is not. He was frightened on the spot and shivered in the cold wind. Mr. Guan smiled and asked, "Dong Xiu, why only scold the civil servants in Ichi Lane instead of those vulgar generals in Cheer Street?" As soon as Dong Hu talked about this, he was full of confidence, stubbed his neck and said the answer truthfully, "I am young and strong now and I will not fight with anyone. If I curse those big and round generals like today, if we walk at night like this, we might have to sleep on the street. Besides, we have made great victories in the army over the past few years and I can't scold them. Besides, there must be a few funerals and scolding. What a curse." Old man Guan nodded, "Yes, not too stupid. Okay, if you want to vomit, go home and vomit on the belly of the girl. Your kid is either a silver gun or a pit in his brain. A pretty daughter-in-law. If you continue this way, be careful when you go out of the wall." Dong Hu flushed at that moment. If it weren't for his own teacher he would have to punch it. Finally Mr. Guan gave Dong Hu 2 words, Students are officials and the troubles arise. Most of them are too impatient for meritorious service and luck. For example, you, Dong Xiaozi, may not have enough skills and come from family background. Someone came to scold me and it was clear to me that it was not my fault, and he had to pretend to be deaf and dumb and let him scold me, but I got the advantage. Dong who was already awake and he immediately thanked him. I never thought that the teacher waited for a long time and slapped Dong Hu's head with a slap. It's really an elm bump, let alone sitting on a cold bench in the Imperial Academy for a few years. I think making you that cold bench is all praise. You are still aggrieved and you don't know what to say. Golden and jade good words, Ishan playful? What can Dong Hu do? He can only giggle. Elder Guan accompanied Dong Hu for a while and said, "It's not ugly, there must be such fools in the officialdom, otherwise I will come out with a stick to chase people out tonight. But after 10 years of scolding, it will be fine in the future. Be an official, be pragmatic and do more serious things. Just remember that in the future there will be young officials like you who like to scold others, and protect yourself a little. Don't let others scold you in the future, you won't be able to bear it. 2 words, even if I say it for nothing, I feed it into the dog's belly." In the night of that year, Dong Hu silently remembered. "Sir, what's wrong with you? Why do you look at the limp? The kick that kicked you just now made you too strong and accidentally cramped. Need it? Go away." Today Dong Hu, who is already an old servant, remembers these past silently. It's a pity that no one was drunk and vomited and there was no to kick. When we arrived at the door of the house, the concierge was still waiting, but the old maid just sat on the steps, sitting quietly for a long time and smiled freely. After half a century of ups and downs in the Huanhai Sea, I was used to listening to the raging waves, and had also said a lot of hard words. Others don't know. Conscience knows itself. At the corner of the street, the old monk Yuanying returned the carriage and immediately went back here. He found his apprentice squatting in the alley eating peanuts, but it seemed that something was different. Lu Jia didn't think much about it. No, drinking secretly, the old man pretended not to know when he thought of it. Lu Jia took out a first-class torture card from his sleeve, and officials of the Ministry of Penalty and Ministry of Industry did not stop him. The old Yuanying walked to the well by the well. Lu Jia probed his head and took a look. Was a pity? The traces of the kendo were not erased by the woman, but it was a great blessing for the sword repairs recorded by the criminal ministry. I couldn't see a flower even when I looked more. Lu Jia walked back to the alley with his hands under his shoulders and said to the young man, "See you, look at the master Qin Shan. He found such a swordsman wife. Your kid should look for it at this level, so don't hang around with Chao Jiogui. Good girls will scare away." Zhao Duanming said, "Master, didn't you find a wife?" Lu Jia smiled and said, "When Master was young he was a bit more handsome than Qin Pingan and Chao Gingxin. On Izhou Mountain it was famous for being suave. It's just a matter of unintentional love between men and women. Otherwise don't say anything. Madam, you can't count with one hand." The young man said in the middle of winter, "Master, you are not sleepwalking, hurry up and wake up." Inside the palace. Song he suddenly said, "Mother, why don't I go to Qin Pingan?" The woman sneered and said, "Nonsense. What can you talk to him about?" It was a polite greeting to him, saying that you were the hermit official and couldn't return home for a long time. Is really hard work? Or you, Qin Pingan, is now the lord of the sect. How much do you do for the Dali court? Or is it that your majesty wants to learn from Zhao Yao, the dignified 9-5-year-old, and he must be humbled and recognize a little uncle? Song he hesitated to speak but stopped. The woman smiled softly, "Don't worry about it. Don't be confused by the Xinjiang mountain watching ceremony and Ning Yao's sword. What is Qin Pingan's question of the sword? It seems unreasonable but in reality properly. Dealing with mountain people like Qin Pingan, who likes to paint places in prison, I can deal with them more surely than you." On the roof of Tianlu Pavilion. Song Su was a bit complicated. The attending ceremony at Xinjiang Mountain and the detailed process of Qin Pingan's questioning the sword. Not only did they have a picture scroll, they even carefully disassembled each link. They thought that Luopashen Qin Pingan and the Longquan sword. Sex Lu Xianyang was already unreasonable enough. He never thought that he would meet Ning Yao from the Great Wall of Sword Qi again today. Han Zhoujin was a little disapproving and whispered, "Swordsmanship is high, good-looking is good-looking, but not too brilliant." Yu lay on the roof with an empty hip flask on his head dangled, Erlang's legs were lifted, and he swayed and said casually, "Ning Yao's beauty is no longer good and Qin Pingan can't match her." The little girl of the soldier monk still cursed both. Just like a person's knowledge, you can read more books, but that sense of humor is mostly natural. Then there are some fair words from the heart, which are similar to the gu jianlong in the summer palace. It really depends on talent. The young Taoist priest who served as the Daolu of the Jingshi was full of emotion, but felt that such an amazing swordsmanship would appear in the world. The little novice monk who had not yet completed his work at the translation bureau, folded his hands together and exclaimed, "Ning Jian is invincible." Song Su turned his head and glanced at the little monk. This little novice monk once hunted down a monk who committed crimes in various states, indiscriminately killing innocents, and threatened to kill the people who were killed by him. Now that he has karma in his previous life, he should be killed in this life, but he even dared to claim that he wanted nothing. When the sky puts down the butcher knife, he can still become a Buddha. It is said that you murdered the little monk, but you broke the killing precept. After returning to the Jingqing Translation Bureau, the little novice monk began to turn through the book behind closed doors. In the end, he not only solved the doubt in his heart and determined where the man was wrong, but also saw 108 Buddhist cases by the way, and waited until the little novice went out. After that, the Taoist heart is clear and there is no more trouble. What you see in your eyes is like the entire Scripture Translation Bureau, which is an innocent dojo with glazed glaze. And the dozens of scriptures translated by Buddhist monks seem to be transformed into a Buddhist dragon. Elephant. After that, the little novice monk has been studying the 3 words, being free. Song Su glanced at the Daolu of the capital, whose father was once a general. Once in a local state and county, he met a forbidden field repairman in a narrow alley. In a flash he was born and died. Afterwards the young Taoist priest was killed. When the man was found, he was covered with scars and blood, and he fell to the ground against the wall, sitting opposite the corpse, but for some reason the young Taoist priest kept his eyes slightly open, with some tears on his face. Then there was the female formation master from Qingtan's blessed land. It seems that everyone has their own story. But no one seems to care that much. Yu was the first to notice the change in Song Zu's mood and asked, "What's wrong?" Before Song Su could give an answer, the little girl was already grinning. "Don't think too much, you didn't have the emperor's life anyway. You have been repaired by the golden core sword at the moment. It's a great future on the mountain. What a fool does it? In the future maybe I will see your eldest brother's son. The latter is a gray-haired old man. In the end I still have to call the emperor when I see you, haha. The younger generation is terrible. Then continue to practice hard and break the realm every day. Better than anything." Song Zurenjin couldn't help but said, "It's the extreme. If you can accept good words and reason, you can become a rich man." Yu was a little flat and became angry and said, "Don't talk like that guy or grandma will be anxious with you." Song Su, who has always been sitting and standing, leaned back and stretched out his hand. "Bring the wine, it must be the Xinjia Jiujiu from Changchun Palace." Yu smiled dryly and said, "Where can I afford to buy such an expensive and lawless drink? I was talking about it with Aunt Fong." The little monk said silently to Ba, "In Yu's square inch, there are 7 or 8 altars hidden." Yu cursed, "Little bald." The little monk touched his bald head and sighed for no reason. When will the little novice monk comb out the 108 troubles? Yu was stunned. She probably felt that the little monk was really thinking about business, so she let him go for the time being. Who wouldn't knock on Muyu? The corner of the little monk's eyes slanted slightly. Han Zhoujin reminded, "Yu, he is fooling you." The little monk folded his hands together. "Song Su is right, beautiful women can't afford it." Song Su said, "I never said it." The little monk Buddha sang and said, "That's what Song Su said in a dream." As the only fire temple in the capital, it enshrines a fire star. The temple is not big and it is not open to the people of the capital. Only when the capital goes by the water, or when there is a disaster in the local area, officials from the Ministry of Rites will come here. Every time Aunt Fong came to the capital to help the children preach, she stayed here. Set up a flower shed, put a few stone benches. Tonight Fong Auntie sits slightly drowsy. Miaozhu is an old woman, just a common man because of her age. If it weren't for the fact that there is nothing to do in the Huoshan temple, she would have been able to change people long ago. It is said that the imperial court had planned to change temple celebrations, and files were recorded on the yamen of the Ministry of Rites, but a little girl from an eccentric background didn't come, so it stopped. Aunt Fong held the jug with both fingers and shook it gently, listening to the beautiful sound of the hops in the jug. The truth that the tree attracts the wind probably doesn't understand better than her in the world. Qi Jingchun from Wensheng's line, Cui Yang from Dei State Master, Qin Pingon from the last hermit of the Great Wall of Sword Qi, and of course Ning Yao from the Colorful World. The avenue is high and it is extremely difficult to stand firm. Especially the proof of immortality? It's even more difficult. It's not even that the qualifications are not enough, the xianxia is not enough, on the contrary, just like the embroidered tiger who has enough knowledge to support the heart higher than the sky, the path he chose to take is to give up too many other paths. Cui Yang can't change the road? Naturally not. Aunt Feng took a sip of wine. Probably this is unreasonable human nature. In the mud of people's hearts, blooming everywhere, the wind does not shake. The inn was still not closed. As expected, it was the capital city. Qin Pingan stepped into it. The old shopkeeper was a very night owl. He seemed to be reading a strange novel. The shopkeeper raised his head and found Qin Pingan. He smiled and joked, "When did you leave the house? There is no sound." Qin Pingan smiled and said, "The shopkeeper discuss something with you?" The old man put down the books and said, "Why, plan to spend 500 taels of silver to buy a piece in the official kiln in your hometown? Good thing, it's a good thing, it's a good thing, it's a good thing, it's easy to say, if it is a bond, give it to it, pay the money and pay goods." Qin Pingan said helplessly, "Well, let me take a look at the condition first." As a result, the old shopkeeper bowed his head, and took out a large vase from the foot of the counter with a little effort. The thing bought with more than 10 taels of silver was not stored. Qin Pingan helped to hold it carefully, bending his fingers, tapping lightly, and at the same time casually asked, "The shopkeeper is not asleep so late?" The old man looked at the boy's eyes and face carefully. "Good fellow, there are no flaws, even the look of disapproval deliberately," and he replied casually, "My girl has no home and I went to the night market with some crazy girls. I'm here, I haven't come back yet. Anyway, it's okay. I just waited. Normally, I let the shop assistant take care of the door. In fact, in this capital, there is nothing to worry about, but I am a father and I am a late girl. She is the youngest girl in the family, don't care about who she is. If her son dares to make such a fuss, the feather duster can't beat him to death." Qin Pingan glanced at the old shopkeeper who was in his 50s. The old man smiled while frothing his beard. "Want to be my son-in-law? No, we are a small family, but we won't be wronged by our daughters. The Ming media must be married," and the eighth carrying the sedan chair walks through the front door. Qin Pingan smiled and said, "It's this old liar. Similarly, if I have a girl, whoever protege on the road dares to look at her more, I will beat his parents to recognize her." The old man nodded, chatting with the boy was comfortable, and he lay on the counter and said, "Go back, what do you say about this sale? Your boy gave you a precise word. Such an expensive item is placed on the counter and you can see it. It's easy to be thief." Qin Pingan raised the vase slightly and read the bottom paragraph. It was indeed the so-called 8-character auspicious words of the old shopkeeper. At first glance, it seems a bit like the meaning of Taoist Qingzi such as the Yuandu Yuka, Yufengqijing and Qingming, but in fact the second half of the sentence comes from Confucianism. If you have to force your imagination a bit, the only weird thing is that the two characters at the beginning and the end are strung together to form the Qingming of Qingming. Therefore, Qin Pingan secretly used his supernatural powers and really took a closer look. The result was that this vase was nothing unusual, and there was no trace of a qi practitioner. Qin Pingan was already familiar with the earthy nature of the porcelain, so he still left. The number of refining ways of the natal thing belonging to the 5 elements is still unaware of the deep meaning. This means that this vase has not been handed by the senior at least, but it is indeed an official kiln made by the dragon kiln in the hometown. This inn is actually very fate. Qin Pingan smiled and said, "The shopkeeper, the goods are not bad after opening the door. In the future, find someone who is knowledgeable and does not lack money in his pocket. If the other party is unprofitable and dares to ask for less than 500 taels of silver, your boss can curse and spray him. With a spit on the face, I am absolutely not guilty." Then there is this 8-character jiu style which has a background and is very unusual. It is very likely that it was taken from the pavilion body of the Zhao family in Tianshui during the Yuan-Shou period. Seeing that the old man did not seem to be fake, he was overjoyed and the boy said, "The shopkeeper, I plan to stay in the capital for a few more days and then I will live here." The old man just put the vase back under the counter carefully, and immediately said after hearing the words, 300 taels of silver I will sell you. The sale is settled and you will be free of all the money for staying in the inn these days. Qin Pingan said helplessly, "Treasurer, you really want to go wrong." The old man stretched out his hand, "Don't say it, in a lax mouth, maybe the inn will have several more empty rooms tomorrow. Compete with me for experience in the arena? Your kid is still a little tender." Qin Pingan's eyes lit up, and he first reached out and grabbed the palm of the old shopkeeper, and then he was about to take out his sleeves and pay. The old shopkeeper was taken aback, shaking his hands vigorously and pulling out, smiling. Forget it, I don't think you are like a rich person. The capital is expensive. Besides, such a large object is not easy to carry. Qin Pingan smiled knowingly, calmly, sullenly, and continued to talk a few words, and the old shopkeeper waved his hand, categorically saying, "Stop talking." Ning Yao suddenly appeared at the door and then, his own husband came from Dadu in Central Aquarius. Qin Pingan walked out of the threshold quickly and bowed. "I have seen Mr." The old scholar smiled and grabbed the closed disciple's arm. Go to your house for a drink." Qin Pingan said heartily, "It's actually just a room." The old scholar stomped his feet and was heartbroken. "This gentleman, I am a bitch." The old scholar immediately turned his head and said to Ning Yao, "Ning girl, unfortunately, I have to meet someone. It's not too late to come back for a drink tomorrow. Maybe the day after tomorrow will be the day after tomorrow. There is no accurate number. Don't wait for me." Ning Yao shook his head and smiled. "No, there are a lot of empty rooms in the inn." Qin Pingan and the old scholar looked at each other and sighed at the same time. With a sad look in his eyes, "I really blamed my husband today, and a man full of guilt, I blame me, my husband can't help you." Then Qin Pingan couldn't help laughing. "Sir, go for a drink." The old scholar nodded. Good. Only when the drink is high there is a chance to remedy it." It was just that Qin Pingan turned his head suddenly, and saw a young girl jumping on the street. "I saw her eyebrows." Qin Pingan stared blankly, first turned his head suddenly, glanced at the direction of Ren Yuniyun Tower, and then retracted his gaze with red eyes and trembling lips, as if to raise his hand to greet the girl, but he didn't dare. Even the old scholar and Ning Yao looked at each other, not knowing what was going on. In Qin Pingan's life, after he learned boxing and left his hometown, there were only a handful of such gaffes, maybe even, he never had it? Qin Pingan raised his arm, wiped his eyes, and then squeezed out a smiling face, took a few steps forward and quietly waited for the girl. Many years ago. "Someone is about to die," she said. "I wish Mr. Chen and the girl you like, a goddess and family." The haggard Mr. Accountant said that he would like to see Miss Su by chance. She finally said, "Tens of thousands. Don't Mr. Chen not recognize me at that time?" That's only Qin Ping's matter many years ago, but it was a girl's previous life. Tonight, the girl who came home in the middle of the night gradually slowed down, thinking that the man in the green shirt standing at the door of her store was so strange that she stared at her in a daze. "Isn't she a disciple?" The girl saw the man raise his hand, smiled and waved and said in a trembled voice, "Hello, my name is Qin Pingan, the one that is peaceful and peaceful." The girl was silent for a moment and then suddenly shouted, "Father, a gangster molested me." The old shopkeeper rushed out of the inn and said angrily, "Don't talk nonsense, it's a guest in our shop." The girl gave a cry. When she passed by the guy, she turned sideways and walked slowly, and then suddenly ran into the inn at a fast pace. When she reached Dad's side, she turned her head and glanced curiously. The man in the blue shirt, standing still, turned her back to her, stretched out her hand to cover her face, shaking her shoulders slightly, then turned her head and smiled brilliantly with her. Alas, it's uglier to laugh than to cry. What a weird person. Dad is also true, how come to have such a customer? The old scholar sat on the steps, smiling and not talking. I guess the truth roughly. Qin Pingan took a deep breath, turned his head, then turned his head a moment later and apologized to Ning Yao. "I'm sorry, don't think too much, I will tell you why later." Ning Yao smiled and shook his head, his eyes were gentle. "It's okay. If you are not such a person, why do I like you so much? You are Qin Pingan and I am Ning Yao. The world loves each other for thousands of years." Sword of Coming Chapter 833. Ning Yao ordered a few drinks with the inn shopkeeper and, by the way, ordered an extra room. The shopkeeper glanced at Qin Pingan and Qin Pingan was silent. "Looking at what I did, the conscience of heaven and earth, the two of us did not collude. Besides, what can I say? I opened the inn." The closed disciple squinted at his husband, and the husband squinted at the street outside the store. The night was heavy, traveling in a foreign land, slightly lonely. Sitting down at the other side of the room, Qin Pingan helped Mr. pour a bowl of wine, then looked at Ning Yao. She shook her head and Qin Pingan only poured a bowl for herself. In the most difficult part of his life, Zhenji, a young man from Jianghu, and Su Xingzhai, a female ghost, accompanied Qin Pingan through the landscape. The old scholar probably felt that the atmosphere was a little silent, so he picked up the wine bowl, touched Qin Pingan lightly, and then took the lead in speaking as if Mr. S. examination of the school disciples' scholarship. There is a saying in the Unmasking article. Chen Pingan just took a sip of wine, and her husband mentioned unmasking. The answer was actually very easy to guess. He quickly put down the wine bowl and said, "Mr. once said that wine is a mess." The old scholar smiled and asked, "Then you don't know why did your husband admonish the world like this back then?" Chen Pingan said, "I guess my husband was poor back then and couldn't drink alcohol, so those who bought wine and paid for it didn't blink?" The old scholar clapped his hands on the table and laughed. "What is a proud student? This is it. It's like the left and right. You were silly back then." Had liked to use these words to block himself, so Mr. should not be allowed to slap himself in the face? My husband wrote so many sage doctrines in the book and I can't fit a few big baskets. I can really do it all. The most intimate and least padded jacket is indeed a closed disciple. The old scholar drank a bowl of wine. As soon as the bowl fell, Chen Pingan was already full. The old scholar stroked his beard and said with emotion, "At that time, the most uncomfortable thing was to turn on the lamp and flip the book at night and herd some drunks in the alley. I vomit. My husband can't wait to sew their mouths and waste money by ruining drinks. I made a big ambition for my husband back then, safe?" Chen Pingan said, "If you become a court official or a Confucian saint in the coming year, you must make a rule that you must not vomit while drinking." The old scholar nodded, "Yes, yes." Ning Yao changed his mind and poured himself a bowl of wine. Chen Pingan talked about jianghu and xianxia in general, and during the period also talked about the old rural woman who lived a life of misery calmly. The old xiaotsai twisted a salty dried peanut shell with 2 fingers, put it in his mouth and nodded. "The only knowledge of a hero in the world is nothing but calmness. The villain reverses the way of the world and turns his backhand upright. It is calm. If I am weak, you nothing can help. If you can be alone, you can still be calm. In fact, all 3 of you here know that the inn, the girl, and the large vase are all arranged by Cui Yang. A lake of books. Let Chen Pingan ghost hit the wall for many years, the whole person was thin and skinny, but as long as it passed, it seemed that apart from the uncomfortable, there was only uncomfortable. Cui Yang never gave much, especially did not give Chen Ping and even the slightest benefit, whether it was Tong Yes's last landscape painting, or the girl in the inn tonight. Cui Huang just gave Chen Ping N's heart to his younger brother. Put a light in the distance if you don't get there by yourself, or if you choose to avoid a detour, you will miss it for the rest of your life. What Cui Yang did seems to be telling Chen Pingan a very cruel truth. Despair, you asked for it, so hope you also want to find it. Ning Yao asked, "Since I have the honor to meet her again in this life, what are your plans next?" In Ning Yao's view, in Su Xinhai's life, the girl barely had some aptitude for cultivation, so she could naturally take it to Luopishan to practice. Don't forget that Chen Pingan is best at doing things. It's not about accounting or even practice, but for others. Protect the way. But Ning Yao didn't think that if a girl went to the mountain immediately to practice, it must be the best choice. Chen Pingan said, "I have to talk to her a few more words first." In fact, Chen Pingan had been thinking about this when he arrived, carefully and carefully. Generally speaking, only by practicing, the young girl who still doesn't know her name in this life has the opportunity to regain her consciousness, remember the past life, and renew the relationship in this life. Just like many ordinary masters on the road of life, you can always meet some familiar people, but most of them don't think much, just after a few glances they pass by. But remembering the events of the previous life, it must be the last thought of Su Xinhai in the previous life. Does the girl in this life want it now? The old scholar smiled and said, "You can come as you are good to the little girl. As for what is really good, you don't need to worry. Many times we have to admit that not everything can be planned in advance, but really only things can come. You can solve it. Peace, don't forget one thing especially for the girl, she is just her, but in your eyes she is Su Xinhai of Shijianhu and Huanglishan. If you don't go up the mountain, for example, in this big city of Lijing, you will live a life of stability in the downhill market, but the years are shorter. It's not a good thing to marry as a woman, to be married to each other and to teach your children. The little girl is willing to go up the mountain one day, and it will not be too late to come back to practice. Luapa Mountain still has some family background, and there is no shortage of preachers and immortal money." Chen Pingan nodded and said, "You must understand this principle before you can do the rest." From beginning to end, Chen Pingan seemed very calm, but in just a few words he had already drunk several sips of wine. Drinking quickly is a taboo at the wine table. No matter how much alcohol you drink, it is easy to overturn the wine tank, and then I mostly ran under the wine table and claimed to be invincible. Chen Pingan said, "Why did Mr. suddenly rush to imitate by Yujing and talk to others?" The old scholar cocked Erlang's legs, took a sip of wine and said with a smile, I have cultivated myself for many years in the Gongda Lin, and I have accumulated a lot of grievances. Learning. I have studied there for many years. I'm also a little diligent. I really want to say the reason. My mouth is itchy like being greedy for wine with no money in my pocket. Chen Pingan nodded and said, Mr. S. discussion this time, although the disciple regrets that he didn't see it with his own ears, but only with the vision that swept over half of the world, he knows that the knowledge of the opponent's husband is very high. Sir, can't you go here? The old Xianxia stepped on the bench with one leg, lifted the wine bowl, gently bumped, and nodded vigorously. The old master is indeed very knowledgeable. He is also one of the world's most prosperous saints in the world. There is nothing very powerful. Lao Xianxia and Chen Pingan each finished a bowl of wine. Chen Pingan smiled and turned over the wine bowl to show that he hadn't left. Lao Xianxia glanced at his wine bowl and took another sip. The wine bowl, say full, continued to be full. The old scholar thought that if you take such a drink, you won't get really drunk in the end. I won't get up until 3 polls tomorrow, and I will complain about Mr. Junqian who is not by his side. Chen Pingan poured the wine again, took off his boots, sat cross-legged and said with emotion, Sir, this is a harmony between people alone to fight for the right time and place. The old scholar sighed, it's a disadvantage, it's difficult. Ning Yao found out that these two disciples didn't talk about winning or losing, and the other didn't ask about the result. They just praised the old master here. The higher the old master's knowledge, the husband wins, naturally the higher the knowledge. The old Xianxia turned his head and smiled, Girl Ning, this journey with the sword is well known in the world. From now on I will say hello to Aliang and the left and right sides. What sword intent and swordsmanship are the highest? I quickly surrender their respective titles. Ning Yao said, I don't come to Howran often in the future, so don't worry about the Confucian temple. If it weren't for Mr. Wen Sheng, she would not bother to explain anything like this. The old scholar smiled and shook his head, worry about what this does. The Confucian temple still has the tolerance. Now it is the Lixing personally taking care of things. The atmosphere is very different from the past. Ning girl, if you don't come often I'm worried. What I really worry about is your lack of freedom from now on. Look at the patriarch of the 3 sects, who would visit another home. As the first person in the colorful world, Ning Yao's situation afterwards is of course much better than that of Qin Qin who has withered the city for thousands of years, but in the end there is the same suffering. Ning Yao said, one world free to come and go is enough. The old scholar sighed and shook his head, it's too early. Ning Yao was a little helpless, but Master Wen Xing said so, she just listened. When she remembered something she told Qin Pingan. The old coachman previously promised her that Qin Pingan could ask him 3 questions without breaking his oath. Qin Pingan smiled and nodded. The old scholar seemed to have felt it. After drinking he smiled and said, some are mixed up with famous bastards but the teachers can't teach them. The changes will not be changed. You really can only wait for them one by one. It sucks it's gone. As for who the old scholar is scolding, it may be the old oilman who does not do in some official circles and is the only one who is the first in the world. Maybe it is some old sword immortal in Xinjiang Mountain, maybe it is something in the world. The old guy with a higher level of life-saving skills, the old scholar did not name him, who knows. Qin Pingan nodded and said, I wrote it down. The 3 of them noticed a strange aura almost simultaneously. Not in Dali capital but far away in Jianghu, it is a dark road that young people avoid. The old scholar relied on the sage and the heaven and earth sense of heaven and earth, Ning Yao relied on the ascendant realm to cultivate, and Qin Pingan relied on the Dao Xian ripples of victory over the great road. Qin Pingan got up and said, he'll go outside and have a look. Ning Yao is about to leave the inn with Qin Pingan. The old scholar smiled and said, Ning girl, you don't have to follow, the Dali court has done a good job of opening the way. You are too strong in swordsmanship to help. It's okay, just some precautions for the colorful world, anyway I figured it out by myself. It's not a fake public benefit. Let's talk to you. Pure sword repair, outside the battlefield, the killing power is endless, the killing ability is the first, the living is not necessarily. Ning Yao settled down again, Qin Pingan shrank into the mountains and rivers, dressed in a blue shirt, and gathered together in a misty figure. He stepped to the top of the capital wall and looked far away. Only hundreds of miles away, the sky was overwhelming and gathered into a winding serpentine-long river. On the road that is specially selected for the inaccessible wilderness, Yin Qi is too strong because there are few living people, Yang Qi is thin, and ordinary Qi fighters, even if they are good at approaching they may have to kill the way. If you take a closer look at the aura, you can find that the trees on the road, even if they are not stepped on, actually have no contact with the undead, but the green color has already revealed a bit of unusual death, such as the face was blue. A group of great training fighters outside the capital city are responsible for guarding this section of the city. One of the old worshippers and the blue-shirt swordsman who appeared abruptly asked, "Who is here?" Chen Pingon drew out the innocence card from his sleeve and hung it around his waist. Since it was from his own family, the old priest just clasped his fists after checking the authenticity of the innocence card and stopped interfering. Chen Pingon was silent for a moment and asked, "Old sir, the number of people seems to be extremely large this time? It seems that there are about 30,000? The old priest nodded. "Because it is the penultimate call, there will be more." In fact, the old worshipper originally didn't want to talk more. It was just that the uninvited guest said, "number of people," instead of words such as ghosts and ghosts that made the old man willing to talk. In the northern area of Dei, in the Longxing land of the Song clan, there is a water and land law meeting held by the abbot of the Beijing Translation Bureau and a Zhoutian Dajiao responsible for the Chongshu Bureau to extradite the ghosts on the battlefield ruins. The hometown has been held for many years, day and night, and it still hasn't ended. It is true that too many people died in the war in a foreign land by the Dali frontier army. In these years, the emperor issued the decree of the Dali court, and the Ministry of Rites took the lead in the specific preparations. The ministry paid for it and the Ministry of War sent people to guard it. Just for the mighty Yin soldiers to cross the border, they opened up 3 costly landscape routes. Every time they rushed, there were thousands or even more than 10,000 battlefield souls who stopped in the daylight to prevent the remaining souls from being exposed to the sun. They inhabited the landscape formations set up along the way by the Dali trainer. For a long-distance tour at night, there are not only the great monks chanting all the way holding the tin to lead the way, but also the Taoist real person chanting the Taoist secretly, ringing the bell to pull it, and even the Qintian supervisor and the Dali iron ride on both sides of the road to prevent the wandering soul, coupled with the cooperation of the gods of mountains and rivers, the city gods and the Xuanhu temple. This matter has never been a major mistake and it will not disturb the people in Yang. It is rumored that an attendant from the frontier army of the Ministry of War in the capital once openly threatened the officials of the household department not to discuss any difficulties with Laozi. This matter has not been discussed. Even if your household department sells iron, dismantles the government office's housing materials and exchanges money, you must ensure that everything the dead souls of the Dei frontier army will not stay in the battlefield site for too long, so that their souls will be scattered. For this reason, the Ministry of Defense specially assigned 5 or 6 people, and they stayed as temporary servants at the Ministry of Housing and Urban Rural Affairs office every day to supervise and monitor the progress of this matter. Quarrels are common. In addition to Dali worshipping monks, Confucian scholars, gentlemen and sages, and leading the way for the 2 masters of Buddhism and Taoism, there are also Qin Tianjian Dishi, Jingshi Xuanhu Temple heroes, Capital City God Temple, Capital Earth Temple, each performing their duties and responsible for each at the Xuanhuan ferry. The dead are picked up. Chen Pingon stood on the head of the city, watching from a distance the scene of the night tour. The country is intact, so where are the people? The mountains and rivers are vast and the clouds are vast. These mountains and rivers meet, but there is already a difference between life and death, and the difference between yin and yang. Indeed, how can there be so many people who see it at first sight and prepare for laughter? Chen Pingon turned his head and saw Song Zhus young monks Yufeng Yuanyu in the distance. He was probably busy rushing to the Yinming Road as early as possible. Everyone was rushing and there was no deliberately concealed trail. Sword repaired Song Zhus' feet. Stepping on a sword and dragging a very long golden line, the array master Han Zhoujin seemed to be walking. Every time he stepped out, the mountains and rivers were several miles in the blink of an eye, and there were circles of spiritual energy ripples under his feet, like the blooming flowers in the night. In addition, Dao Lu Geliang, military monk Yu, Confucian Lu Hui, and young novice monks also performed magical skills and hurried far away. Chen Pingan's figure turned into 18 sword lights, and the city head seemed to bloom suddenly. A dozen miles away, Chen Pingan staggered to the ground, and once again drove on his way with the unskilled sword escape method, finally hanging high in the sky. Stopped in shape, using several kinds of talisman including snow mud talisman to help him hide his energy, squatting on a tree branch on the top of a wild mountain, overlooking the road below the mountain. Lu Yi, who came from the 3 religions of Confucianism, Buddhism and Taoism and Hojue and Guling, obviously had long been familiar with this matter, and had fallen at the forefront of the Yinming path through which Yin soldiers passed. The soldiers took the lead in the walk, and the little soldier girl from the Yu family of Shangju Kingdom, not to be outdone, walked side by side with a group of martial arts spirits from the capital and jianghu. A landscape road for the extradition of the dead is extremely wide, and 4 camps are vaguely separated. Yu and Wumiao Yingling are the most numerous, accounting for nearly half. Song Su and Han Zhoujin found a young man standing in the rear. He was riding a horse in the Dali Iron Cavalry. He was a sword repairman in the Yuan realm who was less than 100 years old. Seeing the two of them, the rider just nodded. Han Zhoujin took out 2 armored horse talisman and rode forward with Song Su. Han Zhoujin and a woman who had a good relationship asked heartily, "What's the matter?" Because Han Zhoujin discovered that the Dade monks and Daomen real people who led tonight are all fresh faces, and their expressions are haggard as if they are not lightly injured, especially the few martial arts heroes. She can even see them when they go. His golden body was worn to an extent visible to the naked eye, and the stars disappeared into the night. The colleague female cultivator couldn't hide her tired look and said, "Once there were too many toads this time, and furthermore, the Ministry of Rites had issued a death order. Dao, the spirit energy was consumed too much along the way, and it has disturbed the landscape more than expected. The air quantity is at least 20%. It is obviously to blame us for bad work. I am worried that there will be accidents in the next night tour. Master Xianxia has spoken. What else can we do? Can only bite the bullet and ignore the damages of the path. Otherwise, no one will be able to take the next evaluation of the ceremony and punishment." Song Su asked, "Huajing, is there anyone making trouble along the way?" The Yuan realm xianxia's face was indifferent and said, "Look back and see the spy for yourself." Song Su was accustomed to this Yuan Huajing, nicknamed Yelong. It is the leader of the 5 gash trainers on another hill. The two sides have disagreeable temperaments, and they have always been difficult to deal with. Only on the battlefield can they cooperate seamlessly. Yuan Huajing frowned slightly and found that there were more than a dozen dead souls on the battlefield on the road ahead, showing signs of their souls dissipating, and said in a deep voice, "Du Jian, are you blind?" A young man behind with a pale face and chapped lips. He was already exhausted from riding a pawn. He was originally sitting on horseback while napping while warming up his aura. He was really exhausted, but after hearing Yuan Huajing's words, he did not hesitate to get up, point his toes, swept forward, raised a palm high, twisted his wrist, and soft silk threads appeared between the 5 fingers, slightly lifted, and the silk threads gathered in an orderly manner. After the formation, golden light gleamed. It was actually a radiant luo jingyi, and the light fell on the walking ground of those ghosts and ghosts. In this way, the young guards the wind while holding the compass in his hand, sheltering the other side. As long as there is a slight sign of the soul of the dead soul, the precious light will shine. Song Su reminded, "It's too late." Yuan Huajing said indifferently, "It seems that it is not yet your turn to have a golden pill to point your fingers." There are 5 people in Yuan Huajing's group. In addition to his Yuanying realm sword repairman, there is also a ghost monk, a Yinyang family chi practitioner, and the other 2 were from Yishio. They are obviously more murderous than Song's 6 people. Song Su didn't take it seriously, and instead took the initiative to talk to Yuan Huajing about the young hermit's entry into Beijing. He met him and talked about the weirdness of the preacher Feng Anti. Yuan Huajing nodded, "I have seen Ning Yao's sword lights before." Song Su hesitated for a moment but still reminded, "There is a clear distinction between public and private." The rider next to him was born in the Yuan family of Zhuge, and Yuan Huajing's younger brother was the concubine of the Yuan family who was married to the prostitute of the Su family in Qingfeng City. Yuan Huajing sneered and said, "Because the prince's surname is Song, can you be so generous?" Song Su choked for a while and suddenly laughed, "You really should have a good chat with that official Chenin." It is rare for Yuan Huajing to take the initiative to speak. "It is still difficult for you 6 to join hands?" Song Su nodded. Yu said that she would only be chopped and cut vegetables. There was a rehearsal afterwards. Lu Hui said that relying on those words spoken by Qin Pingan would be of no benefit to the situation of the war and can be ignored. Yuan Huajing said, "Zhao, you still didn't find a suitable candidate for the criminal department? If it's Zhou Haijing, I don't think the weight is enough." Song Su shook his head and said, "You don't know what Jing Qian's identity is. Zhao Shilang can only step back and determine his aptitude through the questioning of Yu Hong and her." Yuan Huajing frowned and said, "I am not optimistic about Zhou Haijing, a female martial artist." Song Su said helplessly, "Otherwise, where can I find a young martial artist at the top of the mountain, and it must be expected to be among the 10? When it comes to martial arts, we are only worse than Zhongtu Shenzhou. We were recruited by the Ministry of Justice before. That embroiderer is not here. Besides, in my opinion, she is similar to Zhou Haijing, and after all, she is from Beiju Luzhou, which is not suitable. That pure Wufu vacancy actually had a suitable candidate in his early years, but he died in Shijianhu. Otherwise, once the 12 earthly branches are filled in, according to the meticulous deduction of the Xing department and the Qin Tianjian, 12 Qi practitioners and pure martial arts who are less than 100 years old can work together to kill a fairy cultivator outside of the sword repair. The most important thing is that they have endless and interlocking means to ensure that no one on their side will die, or even their realm will not fall. It's a pity that the real assassin's eye is located, and it happens to be the pure swordsman who has been hanging in the air. Otherwise, in the previous battle to accompany the capital, they would never be the only ones who beheaded 2 monks of the military account demon tribe from the Yupu realm. Those 2 monster heads happened to be cut down by Yuan Huajing with a flying sword. These 11 of them are all night tourists, and they are destined to remain unremarkable until the sect is opened in the coming year. Yuan Huajing suddenly turned his head and looked at a mountain ridge and said, "Qin Pingan, why bother to hide? Just like to hide and watch the show?" Qin Pingan only glanced at the young nascent soul realm sword repair after hearing this, and ignored the opponent's provocation. When he arrived here, Qin Pingan began to operate the auras of the 5 key natal Qi residences and the hills of the princes. Yuan Huajing sneered and said, "Since I have chosen to stand on the sidelines, please go a little bit longer and don't respond to people here. The gods of mountains and rivers who protect the road along the way consume the essence of incense accumulated hard, and even the wear and tear of the golden body. As for the Qi practitioner, in addition to the exhaustion of the accumulated spiritual energy, it will even wear down the Taoism. Especially if it is careless, it will also damage the ancestral shadow and yin virtue. Even a sword repairer like Yuan Huajing seems to have nothing to do, but in fact it is not. They still need to use sword aura to protect the road of this big Li cavalry which consumes all the time. Therefore, this errand of traveling on a dark road at night is a thankless affair to anyone. Afterwards, the few sects of the Dali court will certainly make up for it, but it really has to be calculated. It is still profit and loss. Obvious. But even so, it is still the case, but it is the simplest duty. The woman who drove side by side with Han Zhoujin was the ghost monk. She asked in her heart, "I saw the young hermit, what did she look like?" Han Zhoujin smiled and said, "Excellent, personable, romantic sword fairy." The female ghost curled her lips, "But since he is here, he is just looking from a distance, I will admire him less than before." Han Zhoujin explained with a smile, "He is a sword fairy. Even if he is a master of martial arts with a master of boxing, what can he do?" The female ghost nodded her head, agreeing, "That's right. It makes sense. But regret is inevitable in my heart." "What's wrong?" The female ghost can't think of spring anymore. A young man from the same hometown, for the sake of his beloved woman, has stood alone in the city for many years, and she is not allowed to admire him a little. Just her temper. When I saw each other in the future, it was just a hungry tiger attacking the sheep without a word. Qin Pingan was on the top of the mountain, and finally carefully looked at the specific situation of the 30,000 battlefield. The next moment, a bright sword light broke through the night. On the road shining on the earth, it is as bright as the day and the smallest detail is visible, but the most unusual thing is that the sword aura is so majestic and majestic. The ghosts that were already turbid, unreasonably added a bit of clear eyes. In the extreme distance, suddenly there was an imaginary image of a mountain, like the golden body of a monk, standing upright on the road. At the feet of the heroes of the Wenwu temple, Yu Yu and the young novice monk, there were waves of ripples, sparkling under the moonlit night, there was a smooth, mirror-like waterway. It is a wonderful pattern of interdependence between mountains and rivers. The mountains are full of energy and the waterways are full of aura. Not only that, the young novice monk suddenly lowered his head and then turned his head, surprised to find that a group of ghosts stretched for miles behind him, and a golden scripture appeared at his feet. All ghosts and ghosts, when they walk on this road, golden lotus flowers bloom at their feet, swaying. Confucian Lu Hui walked down the road, followed by the Yin Ling behind him. Underneath his feet were snow-white words refined from frontier poems. At the feet of Dao Lu Guling and several Dao sect real people, there are a series of mysterious Dao tactics, making a road appear colorful and glaze. An Yu was shocked to find that on the road in front of her, in the water and light, there appeared a fictitious flying sword that was as big as a boat, laying the road. The vision didn't stop there. When the blue shirt in the far distance began to climb slowly, in an instant golden threads bloomed from his body, drifting away, killing the more than 30,000 heroes on the battlefield. Pull one by one. Climbing alone, dragging forward. With the depletion of his own merits, countless long lines of cause and effect are refined, and the 30,000 een spirits behind him are drawn to each other. After that, the mountain climbing back in the blue shirt, the footsteps faster and faster, and finally walked in the wind like a virtual boat, a ferry, one person leading 30,000 heroes, wading through the mountains and water, flying forward, to exceed imagined extremely fast, rushed to the water and land law meeting in Zhoutiandajiao. All the gods and spirits of the mountains and rivers and various Qi practitioners seem to have nothing to do at the moment. Just follow. Rao Shi Dao Xian is as strong as a sword repairing Yuan, and he is also speechless. Song Su smiled knowingly. Xuanhuan would indeed chat. Song Su, His Royal Highness, the Prince of the Song family of Lily, put away his thoughts, held a fist and bowed to the figure in a distance, fascinated. The female ghost was dull and speechless. After a long time she murmured, "Don't you give up so much merit? Such a loss-making business. I am an outsider, I feel distressed." Han Zujin's eyes were shining and he smiled and said, "He is a hidden official, what he does is not unusual." In that blue shirt, after approaching the destination, he just turned around and clasped his fists heavily with the heroic spirits on the battlefield, and then left with a sword. Perhaps in the night tour team tonight, there were the border guards on Fengshui Road or their battlefield robes. A carriage hung from the tail of the team, because the right servant of the courtesy department in the carriage is not a monk on the mountain, so it should not be too close. The courtship right servants called for a fellow military general. After the two sides discussed, within Song Su and Xuanhuan, all the gods and cultivators have received an order. For the time being, no one should disclose anything about tonight, and wait for the news from the Ministry of Rights. On the top of a quiet mountain in the boundary of Jianghu, Qin Pingan fell down, wiped the sweat on his forehead, and began to sit cross-legged, calming the chaotic atmosphere of the small world in his body. The old scholar came quietly and said with a smile, "I have worked hard to save some money, and if you don't want it, don't you?" The closed-door disciple was very interested in doing this. Not only did he help lead the way but he also used a method. Before doing things he was sincere, first confessing his identity as a Confucian monk with Tiendi, so that he was able to give up his merit and not earn any merit. Qin Pingan immediately opened his eyes and said with a smile, "It is a matter of course to come from heaven and earth and return to heaven and earth. It's like earning money by hard work, it's not like spending money at will. Besides, you can earn more in the future." The old xianxia squatted on the side and let Qin Pingan take a rest for a while, and said with emotion, "I pity Mei Huaiwe, I can't bear to sleep all night." Qin Pingan echoed, "I can't bear to sleep all night, you amame I pity me." The old talent slapped his hand with a boxing, "Wonderful." Qin Pingan said, "It's Mr. S. disciple after all." The old xianxia smiled and said, "Smelly boy, there is no outsider at the moment. It's wasted." Qin Pingan simply stopped breathing and took out 2 pots of glutinous rice, fermented rice from his hometown, one for each with his husband. The old xianxia smiled and asked, "I still don't learn this sword technique well? Why don't you ask Ning girl for advice?" Qin Pingan said honestly, "Sir, it's not that I have no face to learn this swordsmanship from Ning Yao. It's just like me. I don't need to learn from someone and I don't have to be hypocritical with Ning Yao. Besides, I practiced boxing back then. I still spread out the fist score on the table, learned the words from Ning Yao and solved the fist thinking. But I don't want Ning Yao to think too much, for example, to make her feel that her sword practice is too easy and smooth, but when I get to my side it is hard. In fact, there is no hardship. To be honest, practicing swords is much easier than learning boxing." The old scholar said, "It's just in comparison, it's not easy." Then the old scholar stroked his beard and smiled and couldn't help but admire, "This is old kind. Just talk about the love between men and women and talk about Hugin, especially the ability to apply what you have learned. Several of my direct disciples, Cui Yang, Zhuizhui Junqian and Shao Qi, I am afraid that altogether, they are not as good as the closed disciple next to him." Qin Pingan suddenly said with guilt, "It seems that I always let my husband work so hard, but I don't let him worry about an effort." The old scholar took a sip of her wine and chuckled softly, "Say some silly things, don't say anything in the future or your husband will be angry. When I was angry I couldn't help but want to curse at Zhuizhui and Junqian. Now these two are not around, one is at the site of the Great Wall of Jianxi, and the other ran to the Qingming world to see Bai Yi. It is even more uncomfortable to curse." The old scholar turned his eyes, coughed and whispered, "Peace girl Ning, I don't know why she has spoken, Let us go to your senior brother's house to relive the past. Qin Pingan turned his head, his eyes lamented, Sir, what the is going on? No matter how hard you work for the disciple, you can't do this. The old scholar was even more worried and angrily raised the hip flask. Go one. Qin Pingan complained, walk away with a hammer and Mr. Drink it himself. The old scholar gave a hello and suddenly said, by the way, be safe, my husband was just at the inn and gave you the job offer. Ning Girl accepted it, but Ning Girl also said that the wedding banquet must be in Feishing City first. Run a game. Qin Pingan's eyes lit up. Sir, go one by one. The old scholar shook his arm and complained to himself, walk with a hammer, sir, drink it himself. Qin Pingan must knock the flask with her husband. Mr. has worked so hard to make it impossible. The old scholar drank the wine and said, by the way, girl, Ning still needs to go to the Confucian temple with me. There are some things that the Saint of Rites have to say. Since it's a matter of business, it's only in the Gongda Lin side that the etiquette system is in order. Peace, don't worry, it's your own family, and the saints of ceremonies will not embarrass anyone. Ning Girl will not be embarrassed. This round trip does not require much time. Qin Pingan nodded slightly without any objection. My husband's disciple had a drink on the top of the mountain here, and returned to the alley in the capital together. As for the inn, let it go. The old monk Yuanying blocked the road again, frowning and said, Qin Pingan, forget about you and Ning Yao and bring an outsider, it's not compliant. Zhao Duanming didn't dare to speak for the newly recognized brother Qin in such matters. The old scholar looked at the boy and asked with a smile, this boy, Toshihiko, has been struck by lightning several times? Zhao Duanming nodded and said, the hero doesn't mention the bravery back then, less than 10 times. Qin Pingan smiled and explained, it's my husband, not an outsider. Lu Jia wondered, which gentleman? The old Xiaotsai pulled at his shirt and shook his sleeves. Qin Pingan continued, it is the gentleman of the younger generation, that is, the gentleman of Brother Cui and Mr. Qi. The old monk was full of disbelief, and he was so embarrassed that he didn't dare to speak. Even if the statue of Wenxing had been moved out of the Middle-earth Confucian temple, and could not eat cold pig's head for many years, for a monk on the mountain like Lu Hua, a Confucian sage who could stand side by side with the saints of rituals and sub-sages, the Confucian sages who came out of the embroidered tiger Cui Yang Jianxianzhua and Mr. Qi, waited until the original existence far away in the sky was really close at hand. Apart from being embarrassed, he didn't dare to say a word. There was really no other choice. Zhao Duanming asked in his heart, Big Brother Qin really Wenxing? Qin Pingan nodded and smiled, otherwise? Zhao Duanming immediately bowed and said, Dali Tianshui Zhao's children Zhao Duanming pay homage to Master Wenxing. The old scholar smiled and said, Master Lu Duanming, you can't be so polite. Lu Jia clasped his fist and trembled, Lu Jia has seen Wenxing. The old scholar waved his hand and walked in the alley with Qin Pingan. When he reached the gate of the courtyard, Qin Pingan opened the door because the door was not locked. He turned his head and found his husband standing outside the door, not crossing the threshold for a long time. Qin Pingan stopped and waited quietly for her husband. The old scholar looked inside the door, did not move for a long time and muttered to himself, since the luck is so bad and I became my first apprentice, then the husband will not say that you have worked hard. There are some things that the husband has done wrong. The deceased inside the door, the old man outside, the sages and sages have been lonely since ancient times. In the end, the old scholar did not walk into the Yunyuniyun building, but sat on the courtyard stone bench outside the book building. Qin Pingan took some books from the book building and put them on the table. The old Xiaotsai was drinking wine and slowly flipping through the books. In fact, they are all the works of old talents who have not yet become Wenxing, so they are mostly first editions, but they appear to be rough and not sophisticated enough, but the pages are unusually clean like new books, and the title page of each book does not have any. There is no narration in the book collection of a poster reader. Qin Pingan sat on the threshold of the book building, breathing out, closing his eyes and resting, only the sound of Mr. Flipping in his ears. Finally, the old scholar turned to a page, which happened to be the content of the unmasking chapter. The old scholar closed the book and only put the book in his sleeve. There is nothing to say for a night, only the bright moon will go away, the day will rise and the world will be bright. Sword of Coming Chapter 834. Qin Pingan said goodbye to her husband and left the alley early in the morning. Thinking about the letter of appointment, the husband sent it and Ning Yao accepted it. Qin Pingan was in a good mood. The old monk who was in charge of guarding the alleys put down the white jade dojo again in the alleys. Apart from practicing in this life, the old man had no other preferences anyway. Lu Jia really just simply likes to cultivate the Tao. As for the realm or something, don't force it, love will not come, anyway Lao Tzu is not used to you. It's just weird. Could that apprentice be struck by lightning if he didn't protect the way yesterday? It's rare to have no bluffing and bluffing over there to play those martial arts styles so you can breathe all night, very diligent, use the river cart transport technique of gold liquid to return the blood, and run the small Zhoutian over and over again. It is about sincere. Because of the spirit, it's kind of like a thing. In addition to his own practice this night, Lu Hua's spiritual flow turned to the sky, with his visual magical powers, like an immortal traveling on a crane in a vast world of his own unique golden jade jungle, out of the white crane under the Jiang Palace, on the Chongqing Bridge, watch the water and enlighten the Tao. The old monk also had to pay attention to Zhao Duanming's circulation route, so that he could select defects afterwards and help his disciples find out and fill vacancies. Qin Pingan stopped near the entrance of the alley, waited a moment, bent his fingers to knock on the door, tapped lightly and smiled. Master Lu, stop by the door, don't you mind? When the knock on the door sounded in the alley, Lu Jia just converged his mind, and his practice came to an end. The old Yuaning was deeply moved. This young man, worthy of the embroidered tigers Jr., has a really poisonous vision. Seeing his own practice situation so realistically, the old monk got up from the futon, displayed his magical powers, opened a small door to the Baiyu dojo and said, "Please come in. There is an extra word of invitation. It is because your husband is Wensheng's face. It has nothing to do with whether the sword fairy is not the sword fairy, the hidden official is not hidden." However, in just one day, first the young hidden official came, Ning Yao's sharp sword, and when Sheng came by, Lu Hua felt that his usual deserted path of practice was rarely so lively. It's just that I was thinking about finding that guy for a drink. Isn't he already drinking at this moment, so I can only toast 3 glasses with the old coachman? Qin Pingan stepped into it, glanced at the young man who was still practicing and asked in his heart, "Is the old master going to wait until Duanming has entered the Golden Core realm, and then teach a superior thunder method that is naturally compatible with his numerology?" Lu Jia looked weird and wanted to nod her head very much. He slapped a swollen face to fill up a fat man with a young man who was not confused, but the old man's conscience is not relieved. It doesn't matter if he loses face. He sighed, "There is a fart thunder Dao Ju, I'm so sad." Qin Pingan was surprised. With the background of the Zhao family in Tianshui, can't you find a labor rectification? Lu Jia shook his head. In the past few years the Zhao family only found a few secrets of the thunder method. It is 1,000 miles away from the authentic 5 thunders of Longhu Mountain. They dare to give it and I dare not teach it. He is really a sword immortal who doesn't know the price of oil, salt, firewood and rice. Lei Fei is known as the ancestor of 10,000 laws on the mountain. How can this secret record of true law be so easy to get? And it is not a matter of money at all. Beipings of the immortal family, there are not many people who specialize in thunder method, and there is no one close to the word authentic. Even the great heavenly monarch of the gods, Qi Zhen, dare not say that he is good at thunder method. Qin Pingan thought for a while and said, "I'm going to take a trip to the divine continent of China. I have a friend on the mountain. He is a nobleman from the heavenly master's mansion. I have made an appointment to go to Longhu Mountain as a guest. I will see if I can fight for it." She made up a decent secret book, but this matter cannot be guaranteed. Lu Jia frowned and said, "For no reason, why are you so invigorating and mobilizing people to give a piece of Tianda incense to Duanming for free? Why, you are trying to win over Tianshui Zhao as an ally of Luopishan and Dali." Qin Pingan shook his head and smiled, "It's really going to happen. I accidentally missed the secret book of thunder method in Renyuniyun Tower. It's a thanks to Master Lu for helping to take care of the brother's house. Master Lu just needs to do it. One thing is to conceal this from the Zhao family in Tianshui. In short, it has nothing to do with me. Then I will preach for Duanming Anshin." Lu Jia will be skeptical. "It's that simple, really nothing to calculate?" Qin Pingan asked back, "I can't believe in Qin Pingan who meets in a peaceful water, but Master Lu Xian can't believe in my husband?" Lu Jia laughed dumbly, hesitated, and nodded. "This kid has moved out of Wenxing. This is feasible. Confucian scholars, the most important context in orthodoxy, cannot make any jokes. It's just that the old cultivator suddenly recovered his senses and said with a smile, "Good boy, if you lie to me, if you don't do anything, you can earn a good impression from me, right?" Qin Pingan deliberately looked puzzled and said, "What do you say?" Lu Jia burst into laughter, pointed his finger at the young man who thought he was a fool, and clicked, "Even if you have a good relationship with Tianshifu, a Confucian disciple who is not in Longhushan Daomai after all, I am afraid it is a big day." "Master, I don't dare to preach your Five Thunders real method without authorization. You have just said it yourself. You can only use the opportunity of reading books to piece together and touch your conscience. Can a cheat be better than the one found by the Zhao family in Tianshui? I don't find a good reason because it leaks on all sides and is untenable." The old monk stopped talking immediately, and saw that the sword fairy smiled and raised his hand. Five thunders gathered in the palm of good fortune, and the Taoism was lofty Lifahei. Lu Jia looked intently, looked and looked again, nodded lightly and said as usual, "The little master is a master of thunder. He is worthy of being a disciple of the sage Wen, the brother of the embroidered tiger who has learned from the best, cast a furnace, admire and admire. It's settled. I thank you first and only waited for the little master to accidentally lose this secret book in the house, and then I picked it up by accident. Just." Qin Pingan smiled and said, "I will carefully write down all the matters needing attention in practicing this method, and carefully append the end of the book. The text will only be more cumbersome and detailed than the main text. The realm of the old fairy is placed there and I will protect the Tao afterwards. Teaching the FA is absolutely not a problem." Lu Jia was a little embarrassed. Qin Pingan said, "I have to bother with the old immortal teacher. Help me and Tianshui's patriarch Zhao family to ask for a picture and write the Zhao family motto." Of course it has nothing to do with Qin Pingan. Being able to be called here to guard the alley by the senior, Qin Pingan was sure that Lu Jia must be a tight-lipped person. So there was no worry that the old monk would miss his mouth when he was on the Zhao family in Tianshui. Lu Jia breathed a sigh of relief, and asked for calligraphy and painting, a trivial matter. Even if he carried a basket to the door it was nothing. It was for the face of Master Zhao, who wrote beautifully. The Tianshui Zhao family, who was described as Ma Shi Zhao by the Dali officialdom, has a very literary family motto. Qin Pingan is especially fond of the few words. The weather should be clear and high, the knowledge should be profound and far-reaching, the standing should be strong and sincere, and the colors should be suitable. Huang. In fact, after Qin Pingan came to Beijing this time and met Zhao Duanming, he wanted to ask for a copy of the family motto handwritten by the patriarch of the Zhao family. It should not be hung in his study and can be given to the little warm tree. It's just that the situation in the capital is still unclear. Qin Pingan had planned to wait until things happened before opening up with Zhao Duanming. "It's all right now, you can get it without spending money." The old monk was suddenly taken aback. Qin Pingan turned his head and looked at him. Zhao Duanming's mind was immersed in the world, and there was a flow of air that echoed each other, so that the spirit of the whole person was fading out, and people were like mountains. Feiyun is hovering, there are signs of lightning and thunder. Qin Pingan glanced at Lu La, who was taken aback, nodded immediately, and said that you just protect Duanming. Qin Pingan stepped forward to Zhao Duanming's side, stomping lightly, the closed-eyed young man sitting cross-legged on the futon, and then floated into the air. Qin Pingan raised a hand and gently stroked the young man's head to help Zhao Duanming calm his mind. The palm of the five thunder-crowded hands turned into together, gently tapped the center of the young man's eyebrows to calm him, and instantly rise to the top a state of sleep. Lu Hua's eyes widened and his expression was unbelievable. He saw that the surroundings of the disciple's head were magnificent and magnificent, like a mysterious picture of the world being Taoized. The sun and the moon were suspended in the sky, countless stars revolving. I saw that wearing a blue shirt from the bright galaxy with my heart, I picked out a golden light lingering in thundering pocket star, and then with that little hand as if as a longevity bridge slowly rolling into the young man's eyebrows, the star that was blurred by Taoism within Zhao Duanming's personal small world, following the aura of Xiao Zhodan, revolving in an orderly manner, the young man was originally scattered everywhere a few strands of the essence of Taoism that even I didn't even notice. If I get an edict, it will come in an instant, and I will worship the ancient star that seems to be suspended in the sky. Qin Pingan lightly patted the young man's forehead, and the young man brought the futon to the ground again. Lu Jia asked cautiously, "Qin Pingan, are you a great cultivator of the Ascension realm?" Qin Pingan smiled and said, "I am not, my wife is." Lu Jia endured but still couldn't hold back. He asked the biggest question in his heart. "Qin Pingan, why did you kidnap Ning Yao?" Qin Pingan adjusted his clothes, shook his sleeves, smiled and said nothing. "Isn't this obvious? It depends on appearance and tolerance." Lu Jia was stunned for a long time, jokingly, "Are you a tailor?" Chen Pingan smiled and said goodbye and strode out of the alley. The young man who had been kept in the dark slowly recovered his senses. After opening his eyes, he stood up and jumped a few times, only feeling extremely refreshed. Finding the master sitting on the futon drinking, Zhao Duanming squatted over, smelling the wine to relieve gluttony. Lu Jia smiled and said, "It was not clear before why the national teacher asked me to wait patiently, saying that I should owe the salary first, and then someone will come here to pay. The world is messy, twists and turns, and it's not real, but it depends on the general quality of people's hearts." Lu Kai is quite accurate. Zhao Duanming said, "Master is embarrassed to accept my brother Chen's money? Master, of course you are very strong about practicing and preaching. Otherwise, you won't be able to teach me such an apprentice, but you really have to learn from me when it comes to humanity and sophistication." Lu Jia smiled and stopped speaking and turned his head to look into the alley. The former national teacher Cui Huang had been here year after year, day after day alone, but he never felt lonely. The worry of the heart is like a tiger's tail, and it is involved in the spring ice. Now there are more juniors walking in the alleys. It is as clear as the sun and the moon, and as far away as the journey of the stars. It seems that the sword fairy in Qingshan, although young, is not a chess piece, but is located in the capital, where the mountains and rivers of a country are the chessboard. Invite your opponent to take a seat and try it. The old monk thought about it again, quite proud. The janitor, myself, Chen Pingan, Ning Yao, and Wen Sheng can barely be regarded as stopping the three. Who can compare to it? Lu Jia coughed, handed over a jug of wine and smiled. "Duanming, drink." The teenager patted off Master's hand and laughed and said, "Master is talking about laughing. What kind of wine to drink? The disciple is young, but he can't stand the smell of wine." Anyway, only a few steps away when he arrived at the inn, Chen Pingan was not in a hurry to find Ning Yao. He chatted with the shopkeeper first, and after chatting he asked about the girl. The old man yelled, "The surname is Chen, don't eat the bowl and look at the pot. Hurry up and put away the crooked mind. Besides, did you kid take the wrong medicine? My girl looks pretty but she doesn't feel better." Girl Ning. Chen Pingan smiled and tentatively said, "The shopkeeper, what do you think?" "Who am I?" "The shopkeeper has seen the 3 teachers and 9 Lu who go north and south, and you have long developed a pair of golden eyes." "I really can't see it? I just think she is good." The old shopkeeper laughed angrily. Stop it, stop it. Could it be that I'm going to learn the art with you, a little girl's family? What kind of martial arts skills? Let me talk more about this." To talk about the martial arts in the market, let alone sell that dogskin plaster with guns or smashing boulders on his chest to earn some hard money. Although the young man in front of him is mostly a quagmire who lives here, he wants saying that you let your daughter go to learn martial arts with someone. Isn't it just a few days after you get calloused? How can you marry someone? It hurts to think about it. The most worried thing is that stupid girl female. When I was young, I dreamed of being a heroine of the world. Fortunately, there was a time when the 2 gangsters of Yiqi Lane and Cheer Street fought in groups. It was a fierce fight and the bricks were broken a lot. I saw my girl sullenly ran home. After that, I felt relieved. I just yelled that when I grow up, it's not too late to practice my internal skills first. Chen Pingan said, "Then if I was in the inn with her and met her on foot, wouldn't it be illegal?" The old man yelled, lowered his voice and said, "What the do you picture? Chen Pingan, you honestly tell me, otherwise they'll really have to chase people. There are 2 sons but only 1 girl. I was kidnapped by your kid, and the murderous aunt of my family can kill me." The old shopkeeper really didn't think this young foreigner was a wicked person. What's more, the world is peaceful now. The days of the people of Dali are safe and secure every day, not to mention the people in the rivers and lakes. The gods on the mountain dare not. The old man suddenly asked, "Chen Pingan, tell me the truth about you. Which sect do you belong to and how big is your name?" "In the boundary of Longzhou, I only heard that there was a towering Piyun mountain, the Wei Shanjun who was rumored to be rich in wealth, and the Longquan sword sect full of sword immortals." Chen Pingan smiled. "The little sect, I don't know the shopkeeper. Anyway, there are not many people, but I can guarantee that my house is good." The old man sneered and said, "If I go out, I will tell people that I am here, which is one of the best inns in Beijing. Every day I go in and out. It is not the great masters of the rivers and lakes like Yu Hong and Zhou Haijing, or the immortal master who drives the clouds and mists. Believe it or not." Chen Pingan nodded and said, "I don't believe it." The old man asked, "You kid wouldn't really like my girl, right? Could it be love at first sight?" Chen Pingan smiled bitterly, "Really not." The old man was relieved and nodded. "That's all right," and then he patted the table, "which is very bad. My daughter is not worse than Na Ning Yao." The old man waved his hand and he didn't look forward to get out. After Qin Pingan left, someone from the yamen soon came to look up the book, Two Faces, but the official card was correct, and the old shopkeeper didn't think much. After they turned to the names of Qin Pingan and Ning Yao, the two smiled at each other. One of the young officials continued to turn the page casually, and then smiled casually. Shopkeeper Lu, business is booming. The old man lay on the counter at will, and he didn't give the slightest bit of attention to these public servants. His own inn was opened on the edge of those two streets. 2 generations, almost 50 years old, have never seen any civil servants and generals. They are in the center. The Huangzi Gongqing, not only a familiar face but also a lot of encounters on the road, but also can say hello. In this regard, the old shopkeeper has always been quite arrogant, so this time just smiled and said, "Business is okay." Ning Yao didn't deliberately immerse himself in spiritual practice and cultivate his sword intent, otherwise it would be tantamount to a great battle between the two worlds. She just sat at the table for a night, and then in the early morning she opened her eyes, subconsciously stretched out her fingers, and gently twisted the corner of a sleeve. When the knock on the door sounded softly, Ning Yao said, "The door is not fastened." Qin Pingan pushed the door and walked in. Ning Yao glanced at the green shirt with a jade hairpin on his head and said nothing. Qin Pingan took out a few essays written by the writer from his sleeve and smiled. "I still have to stay in the capital for a few days. I'm afraid you will get bored, so I picked a few books and flipped through it." Ning Yao looked at a few books on the table, carried them and asked, "There is no jianghu romance and legendary gongan?" Qin Pingan asked, "Do you want to look at this category?" Ning Yao asked back, "Otherwise look at those strange smoke powder and strange nonsense?" Qin Pingan was speechless. Those romances at every turn are the hidden masters instilling a lot of internal strength for the younger generation, which is quite nonsense. But what the daughter-in-law said is correct. Qin Pingan first talked about the visit to the Confucian temple invited by the Saint of Rites. Ning Yao nodded and said that there was no problem. Then Qin Pingan immediately turned around to find books, but there seemed to be no such books in the library. I remember that when he was still Xiao Haitan's big disciple, he pestered Old Wei and Xiao Bai privately every day, saying that everyone had passed her several decades of skill. Later the old cook filed a complaint, and then Pei Qian ate chestnuts to his fullness before letting Wei Xian and Lu Baixiang go. The old shopkeeper saw Qin Pingan back and forth jokingly, "You can't look good. It's pretty fast for a young person." Qin Pingan pretended not to understand and asked, "The shopkeeper, is there a bookstore nearby?" The old man nodded. "Not far, there is a bookstore half a street away, but the shop's so close to Cheer Street in Ichi Lane, you can imagine that the price is not cheap and they are mostly rare books." "What? Now, you guys in the martial art of the rivers and lakes who have to deal with others beforehand, can you say a few words?" The old man roughly pointed the way. Qin Pingan thanked him and said with a smile, "Daughter-in-law wants to read a book so she can look for it there." Qin Pingan took a walk and found the street. There were indeed many bookshops. He spent 7 or 8 ounces of silver, picked a few books, put them in his sleeves, changed his mind and detoured to another place about 3 miles away. Through the streets and alleys, Qin Pingan finally walked to a ferry house inn at the end of the alley. The door face was not big and there was no ferry house ostentation. The ordinary master passed by, he would definitely not take a second look. This decapitated road will only turn around and leave. Qin Pingan knew about a few songzus who went out of the city last night to travel long distances. Their figure started from this place. Later, when they returned to the capital, they also settled here. Most likely this is their place of cultivation. As soon as Qin Pingan was about to knock on the door, he frowned slightly, and his figure fluttered backwards and fell 10 feet away. There was a female ghost monk in the Golden Core realm, her figure fictitious, from the door with the painted door god. A flew out. Qin Pingan glanced and found that it was the female ghost next to the young Yuaning Jianxiu, mostly Songsu and Guling, but they belonged to different mountains. "Is this to discuss the Taoism?" still asked Jian Wenquan. It was just that she saw her figure spinning, her colorful clothes fluttering, her teeth and claws flaring, and she seemed to have nothing to do with her, and her cannibalistic eyes and coveting face. What happened? Qin Pingan's hands were sleeved, and he just moved sideways to avoid the female ghost Yufeng's figure, like a colorful female ghost spinning half a circle, spreading his arms, about to hug the blue shirt. "Are you endless?" Qin Pingan didn't turn his head, just raised an elbow and slammed it back, hitting the female ghost in front of the door. The ghost fell to the ground so dizzy she sat up, pulled out a kerchief from her sleeve with 2 fingers, wiped the corner of her eyes and started to cry. Qin Pingan turned his head, frowned and asked, "What's the matter?" The female ghost was full of vigor and did not speak, but floated towards Qin Pingan suddenly, without murderous intent, as if she was blindly stalking. Qin Pingan always put his hands in the sleeves, raised a foot, kicked her forehead, and the female ghost hit the wall. Wrong. It's some kind of weird blindfold that can cover the mind. In short, seeing is imaginary. Qin Pingan squinted, sticking out his sleeves with 5 fingers like hooks, grabbing the head of the female ghost, pressing down quickly, and smashing it to the ground, twisting his toes slightly, and covering the road with martial arts, not allowing her to escape. Then she poked her heart with a tiptoe and made a bang. The poor girl ghost's figure in colored clothes, like a rag, wiped all the alleys, and then the woman's body in colored clothes suddenly expanded and hovered over near the entrance of the alley. It was like a huge painted lattice picture on the wall. Qin Pingan reminded, "It's almost enough." On the walls on both sides of an alley, the sky was dim and dark in an instant, and countless female ghost heads were protruding, but they were not stern, but smiled like a flower, like the infatuated woman who finally saw the lover return home. Qin Pingan had already planned to be ruthless and sighed for no reason and said, "One last warning." Xuanhuan in the inn walked into the corridor and said in a deep voice, "Changyan, stop." The female ghost named Gayan immediately gathered her magic skills and appeared in the alley with a graceful posture and salutes. The little girl changed her beauty and saw Gongzi Chen. Qin Pingan explained, "I'm looking for someone." Gai Yin smiled, "It's good to find someone. I opened this inn. Anyone can find it. I will lead the way for young Master Chen." Qin Pingan shook his head and said, "No." The woman was extremely aggrieved and timidly said, "The inn is my site. Whether to open the door to welcome guests to earn the fairy money, there is actually no fixed number, it just depends on the little girl's mood. Qin Gongzi is a gentleman, can't you break in?" If Song's 6 small hills belong to strange people, but both their status and temperament are still normal, then the nickname Yelang Jianxiu Yuanhuajing, his 4 subordinates, it seems that there are no fuel-saving lamp. In addition to this female ghost named Gayan, there is also a young rider named Kushu from Yishio, and a 5-element practitioner from the Yin-Yang family. Finally, there is a wild Shio from Shanz's quirky background. He looks like a young man with a cold face and murderous brows. I took a name for myself, my last name is Go. The young man has a bad temper and has a strange desire to be a national teacher of a small country, to become a vassal of the Dali vassal, no matter how small it is. Qin Pingan shrank the mountains and rivers in one step and broke open the inn's unremarkable forbidden formation. He looked around and saw a house in the cloud and mist. With a stroke of 2 fingers, he opened the door and entered, falling down and smiling. Said, "There were so many people last night, it's hard to say." The young man was struggling. Actually, he had already walked out of the dojo where there is a cave in the house. At this moment he saw the blue shirt in front of him. The young man first clasped his fists and then made a fuss. He seemed to feel wrong. Finally he had to scratch his head, shouted Mr. Chin, and then started. Grinning silly. In the old days of Shihao Kingdom, in the dog meat shop, there was a young man who was mistaken for being a dumb boy. Later, he met a man in a blue cotton-padded coat, took him to a meal, said a lot, and gave him a possibility. Finally, I borrowed a small summer money from the teenager. My enemy. The Gayan in the alley was not annoyed, but shyly stomped and followed. When she came to this courtyard, she was extremely surprised. Did she know Qin Pingan? Why, never heard of this. Han Zhoujin also came to the entrance of the small courtyard, and there was a follower Yu beside him. The boy smiled brilliantly. Mr. Qin, my name is Go Cun today. Qin Pingan smiled and nodded. The name is good. Go Cun. Don't forget the original life. Qin Pingan stretched out his hand. The boy hurriedly took out a small summer money that he had kept all the time from his sleeve and handed it to the other party, apologizing. Mr. Qin, I spent the small summer money back then. Qin Pingan said, I borrow money to repay and I can't talk about interest. The boy grinned, knowing that Mr. Qin was joking. Qin Pingan put away the small summer money, twisted his wrist, and produced a green bamboo stick, which is the hiking stick of the literati and gentlemen for mountaineering. On the top of the hiking stick, there is a 2-character inscription, Zhiyuan. The young man held a hiking stick in his arms and was not good at words, but silently bowed to Mr. Qin to thank him. Next moment, before the young man raised his head and stood up, he was instantly alarmed. In fact, not only Go Cun but also the female ghost in the courtyard, Han Zhoujin and Yu at the door, and Song Su gathered in a nearby courtyard, everyone found themselves in the cloud. The formation master Han Zhoujin had already sacrificed the ruins of the fairy palace, and then there was only a sword light between the sky and the earth, breaking the sky and the earth, forcibly breaking the mountain and water restriction of an ancient Tongbai blessed land, only to see that Qin Pingan grabbed it with one hand. Gayan's bun, holding Gokun's neck with one hand, the female ghost Gayan's aura was suppressed by her fist, almost stagnated, and a little bit of wind and grass. The natal chi house belonging to the 5 elements has the heartbreaking pain, as for Go Xiuan has fainted. The most troublesome part is that Gayan and Go Xiuan are lightly stabbed by Fei Jian at once. Jian Qi penetrated into the small world in the body. The sword immortal and Qingshan, who did not say hello, looked around, took a few glances at the aura of the avenue of the ancient immortal dojo, then stared at Han Zhoujin and smiled and said, "I'm a little bit strange, how did you kill back then? The monster army accounted for the Jade Innocent Realm, attacked and beheaded? No, it's just to give you the hat, right?" Qin Pingan said to himself. "Or, as long as there is a shortage of manpower, the 11 of you can only be considered as a mess? It's okay, just come in. Besides, there is no need for you to plan to kill others in the world. Good thing the debt will be repaid one day, and that's it now." The Yin and Yang family chi practitioner was about to pinch the Daoju and use an extremely mysterious natal magical power. At the price of 1 level of self-fall, he helped the 11 people to return to the before, and make preparations early. As a result, there was a sword light directly above his head. Yuan Huajing appeared as Sui Lin's guardian, offering a natal flying sword, using the flying sword against the flying sword, cutting off the sword light, never thought that the 5-element family practitioner was around him. The sword light lit up countless, directly stirring up that slender thread of time. Qin Pingan left Go Xiuan and Gayan in his hands, and walked to Dao Lu Gelying in one step. This Taoist priest actually chose to directly explode the golden core in Yuaning and replace them with ordinary earth immortal monks. The end of the elimination. Qin Pingan, full of fist like a waterfall and scathed, walked out of this slightly chaotic battlefield at random, stretched out his hand to hold down Yu of the military cultivator and punched close to him, gently pulled closer to him and then turned around. With a heart-to-heart elbow, Yu vomited blood and flew out dozens of feet. His figure flashed. Just about to lift his foot and step on it, the corner of his eye found that Yu was actually far away. It was a bit interesting. In the small world of the caged finches, what I saw in my eyes still received interference. It seems that the female ghost, the legendary painter profiler on the mountain, was still hiding a lot of clumsy in the alley. So the next moment, in the eyes of 11 people, the heavens and the earth are tilted, twisted and upside down to varying degrees. Like a world cut into countless realms by the master. The female ghost Gayan was about to make a move, and her vision was full of sword light, and dozens of long swords were nailed into her body and the colorful clothes in an instant. Go Xiuan, who was supposed to have been sleeping for a long time, suddenly opened his eyes, and Qin Pingan stepped on the center of the mouth and passed out again. At the same time, Qin Pingan squinted the little novice monk and smiled, as if saying that it was you. Wearing a blue shirt as if stepping out of the door, volleyed into the air, appeared behind the little novice monk, wrapped his arms around the little monk's neck, and supported the little monk's chin with one hand, but Qin Pingan hesitated and chose to stop temporarily and pat. He patted the little monk's head and smiled, "Be careful later." With together, he drew a circle, and around the little novice monk, a golden thunder pond appeared. Qin Pingan changed the battlefield, shook his sleeves and hung the talisman like 2 galaxies, besieging the 5 elementalists. Han Zhoujin was shocked, and he didn't know when he actually lost the chi traction with the Shenfu ruins. Qin Pingan looked around, raised his hand casually, patted the flying swords of Yuan Huajing and Song Su, and said, "Knowing that you have a lot of back players, but it is useless. If you don't have a chance to use it, you have already lost." With a flick of his finger, he blasted a fragment of the golden body at the Yin-Yang family Chi practitioner. Qin Pingan said, "It's a compensation. Let's go back." The time reversed for a moment and the 11 people returned to their respective positions, but with the support of the little novice's dharma and supernatural powers, everyone still remembers. Sui Lin sat down on the ground with a pale face, but the golden body fragment in his hand could make up for himself. There is still a surplus in the loss of Taoism. Half of the monks were not convinced, and the remaining half had lingering fears. The sword immortal in Qingshan with the most fierce shot seemed to be the only one who was not affected by the long river of time. He was the first to return to the place of the inn, standing in the corridor with his arms and sleeves, and smiled with the boy who was still bowing his head, scared. The boy was dull and speechless, still holding a mountain stick, got up and scratched his head, then shook his head. "Mr. Chin, I learned it." Chin Pingan whispered, "Cultivating on the mountain, the clouds are treacherous, the higher the climb, the greater the mountain breeze, so be careful in the future." Then Chin Pingan laughed, "Of course it's not that you have to be careful of my sneak attacks in the future. Today's shot is an exception." Chin Pingan began to help the 11 people to resume the fight, and then gave some suggestions. As for whether they listened, it didn't matter. If they weren't the monks carefully selected by seniors and spent a lot of money to cultivate them, Chin Pingan would be too lazy today. Then a large piece of golden body fragments of ancient gods is not money. Chin Pingan finally asked in his heart, "Go Xian, what happens when I see someone who eats dog meat now?" Go Xian was silent for a moment, raised his head and said frankly with Mr. Chin, "I still feel uncomfortable, so if you listen to Mr. Chin, you must become the national teacher of that small country in the future and order that no one is allowed to eat dog meat in a country." Chin Pingan nodded, "Take it slowly." Chin Pingan was about to leave this fairy home in. Unexpectedly, the female ghost had the courage to approach a few steps, blinking a pair of big eyes. "Master Chin, let's go now, I'll see you off?" Chin Pingan angrily smiled and said, "Is it greasy or crooked? Let's talk about it. What exactly are you drawing?" She looked a little shy. Learning from Han Zhoujin, she was upset at the sight and couldn't hold it. Han Zhoujin's face flushed and she became angry and said, "Gayan, clean your mouth." Chin Pingan was speechless and passed away in a flash. Temple of Fire. Under the flower shed, Aunt Fong squinted her eyes, came uninvited, and entered without knocking on the door. "Who are they?" The old coachman said straightforwardly, "The situation forces you to answer Chin Ping's 3 questions. What do you think that kid will ask?" "I prepared early. Don't shy away. If it wasn't for you to make trouble, I wouldn't have to suffer more from those 2 swords." Aunt Fong smiled, "Chin Pingan will definitely ask who you are first." The old coachman said, "What else?" Aunt Fong continued, "The broken life porcelain, did you participate in it?" The old coachman nodded, "This is a good answer, no shit." Aunt Fong Tut said, "You have a conscience, right? You have bet on the Ma family in Xinghua Lane a long time ago." The old coachman did not hide. "I am most optimistic about Ma Xuanhuan, there is nothing to hide, but what the Ma family did has nothing to do with me. Neither instigated them nor helped to erase the traces afterwards." Aunt Fong thought for a moment. As for the 3rd question, there are too many things he might ask, it's hard to guess. Such as, for example, in the refining of Liju Dongshin's natal porcelain, who is the instigator? Do you want to answer? Oh. The old coachman took out a small porcelain bottle and opened it wide, surrounded by purple air, sniffed it lightly, and suddenly he was full of golden light, flowing around his body, mending his injuries. The body of the gods, being cut by the sword repair, is one thing good. That is, there is no remaining sword energy, and the aftermath of the sword energy will be washed away by the long river of time. As long as the golden body does not break on the spot, no matter how severe the injury is afterwards, there will be more cracks. Can make up and repair the golden body. The old coachman was silent for a moment, a little helpless. "Tell Ning Yao, as long as it is a question I don't want to answer, I can ask Chin Pingan to change it." Aunt Fong smiled and said, "That's it?" The old coachman sullenly said, "The little lady gave an explanation, but there are only 3 things." The old coachman suddenly raised his head. "You old lady, don't cheat me anymore." Aunt Fong joked, "If it really doesn't work, it's okay to die for the Taoist friend and not to die for the poor. Let's show the roots and feet of that person in Chin Pingan." The old coachman shook his head. "The 4 most difficult ghosts on the mountain in fact don't mess with anyone. The other 2 people behind the scenes, one of them is a dragon breeder from the line of Fulong. There is another from the land of Yinyang family. The one who is in the bright and the dark is the capital trainer who was beaten to death by Song Changjing indiscriminately. The one in the dark, the site of the old 5 mountains of Dei, is all from this person. Handwriting. These few of them are immortal. Under the fence of the Liju cave, of course they have their own needs. The old ancestor of Fulongshi is betting on the Dali Song family, and by the way, suppressing the luck of the Lu family on Fulu Street. As for the Andy Fong, apart from protecting the road, it was just getting involved everywhere. For example, Xuanhuan and Yuan Xian were brought out of the Liju cave, and the pair of future civil and martial arts were given to the Great Court. Only with that ZTE the Song clan of Dei would not be cut off from Guizhou, and was easily annexed by the LV family, which was the former overlord of Dei. Compared to Aunt Feng and the old coachman, the yin-yang monk from the Lu family of Middle-earth was hiding behind the scenes, threading needles and leads all day, and acting the most sneaky, but he was able to make sense and was within the rules. The old coachman said for no reason, within Jiazi, first come first served. Ma Xuanhuan actually has a chance. It means that the illusory and ubiquitous awe-inspiring luck has broken several continents, mountains and rivers, and the great monks of the two worlds have fallen so many, which one is not the one who is the original one, but they are all returned to the world. It was like an invisible battle. Earlier, the sword fairy embryos of the Great Wall of Sword Qi, as well as the Baijin fairy of Tuoyue Mountain, actually belonged to the imminent warfare, and they all rose to the occasion. Later, the sword fairy Su Hao, the Baidi city Gu Kan and his ilk, one by one turned out to be born, rising extremely fast, so in the past 100 years, it has been a great year for cultivators and there is nothing to miss. Unless Wen Hai, who had gone to the sky, was thorough enough to be able to return to the world, and war would start again. The old coachman glanced at the sky and sighed, I have to say, this thoroughness is indeed remarkable. Aunt Feng smiled and said, it is the way for monks to raise Tibet. The old coachman frowned and said, the merit is hard to come by. There is something wrong with Qin Pinggan's brain. Aunt Feng shook her head, unwilling to say more about it. The so-called human nature, in the final analysis, is to like to fight with yourself. As a god, he is born to be able to classify into different categories, not bad, happy, angry, sad, and then subdivided into hundreds of boundaries, everywhere in order. Regarding this matter, the saints of the three religions all have many solutions. For example, the Buddhist Taoists all praise the observance of one law. More recently, only the old scholar who restored the temple of Confucianism is already in the Book of Sages. Exploring the heavenly secrets, for example, the mortal observations are suspicious, the center is uncertain, the outer objects are unclear, the bright moon travels at night, and when you see its shadow you think that ghosts. The heart is the king of the shape, and the lord of the gods is also needed. Self-restraint, self-deprivation, self-restraint. This is the essence of the old scholar's unmasking chapter. Therefore at the end earlier, the old scholar seemed unintentional and casual, and mentioned his unmasking chapter. At that time, Aunt Feng withdrew a gust of breeze and stopped eavesdropping on the conversation. The so-called rumors in the world were really not because she deliberately went to the auditorium, it was really due to her own destiny. Qin Pinggan returned on the same road and approached the inn. She just happened to ran into the girl and went out. When she saw the guy, the girl turned around, ran back to the inn and walked around the counter. She hid beside her dad, and then pretended to be ready to order. Qin Pinggan crossed the threshold without squinting. Suddenly stopped, turned and walked out of the inn to the alley house. The big queen mother finally came. At the counter, the girl whispered, "Father, did I wrong him?" The old shopkeeper said in a deep voice, "No, this kid is in the world with many eyes, he is trying to catch him." Qin Pinggan was quite helpless. Walking slowly in the street and nothing happened, Qin Pinggan began to babble casually. The ancient bamboo horse hit the waist of the skirt, Zhuma listened to the sound of selling flowers, the lotus charmed the fish, and the screens complained about the autumn of the jade. Clouds across the river cannot send water boats, the magpie bridge immortal sees the pot in the sky, mountain ghosts sing xuanhuan. You're tuning in to the Sword Dance in the Vast Sky YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.